of the dark mountains, a baby's cry echoes through the night, drifting over a lonely cabin ringed with traps and warning bells. Inside, the hunter hears the noise, grabs his axe and walks out, thinking some unlucky thief has just crawled into a hunter's den. He steps into the night with his axe ready, reminding himself that anyone creeping around a hunter's house is asking for trouble. Seeing that someone slipped past every trap without a sound, the hunter decides they are no ordinary sneak and lunges forward, swinging his axe to finish them before they can even react. When his swing hits nothing and the yard is empty, the hunter lowers his axe, wondering if he imagined it. And the thought stings because he was already told a real child was something he would never have. A sudden small sound cuts through his thoughts and makes him pause. Back inside, the hunter freezes at the sight of a tiny bundle on the table, then scoops up the baby in shock, unable to understand why a child has suddenly appeared in his house. The baby sleeps calmly against his chest, while the hunter stares down with wide, uneasy eyes, already feeling that this tiny stranger is about to turn his whole life upside down. Vincent holds the strange baby close, almost afraid to breathe as a warm light seems to wrap around them both. Alina steps into the doorway, half asleep and worried, asking why he is making such a fuss in the middle of the night. Alina hurries over, shocked to see a baby in his arms, and Vincent stammers that this child is somehow theirs. He explains that the baby suddenly opened his eyes and waved his tiny hands as if waking the world. Sweat runs down Vincent's face as the weight of that miracle finally hits him. As if answering his birth, the wind began to howl and thick clouds rolled across the sky. Heavy rain poured down from above, soaking the cracked earth that had waited far too long. The dry fields turned glossy with water, and the villagers raised their arms in joy. As he grew, the child used his strange power to push back beasts and dangers, wrapping the village in safety. With full wells and full bellies, people started to whisper that this wonder-working boy was a true mage, since they had no other way to explain him. Years later, a boy sits in the grass with a thick red book laid across his knees, tracing the gold letters that tell the story of a kind mage. Arian Shiren leans back against the tree, eyes bright as he looks up from the book and happily calls out to his dad nearby. Arian Vincent, now a sturdy 40-year-old with an axe and a load of wood on his back, beams with pride as he spots his son waiting for him. Laughing, Vincent grabs his boy and whirls him around, cheering that he has gathered enough wood and that it is time to head home for a good meal. As they walk, Shiren tugs on Vincent and blurts out that he wants to know how to use magic. Vincent freezes mid-hug, staring at his son like he just heard something impossible. Vincent laughs and tells him that magic is not some faraway thing. To him, dropping a bear with one arrow or cutting down a tree with a single swing already feels like magic enough. Out by the field, two village boys pause their game with the ball when they spot Vincent and Shiren. They call out their names, happy and a bit curious about the pair. As Vincent and Shiren walk past, the boys whisper that they always ask Shiren to play, but he would rather stay buried in his books. They eye the thick red book in his arms, doubting he can even read something that big. The boys keep going, saying Shiren is too skinny, nothing like Vincent, and that their mothers claim he was left behind by strange parents. Vincent hears every word, his hand curling into a tight fist as he burns at how these brats talk about his son. Vincent's jaw works as he fights the urge to snap at them, a bead of sweat sliding down his cheek. He forces himself to calm down, more worried about how Shiren might feel than about his own pride. His own words about felling a tree with one swing echo back at him, and he wonders if brushing off real magic was the right thing to do for a boy like Shiren. Then Shiren looks up with a wide grin and says that chopping a tree in one blow really is magic. His simple faith makes Vincent glance down at him, the anger fading as he feels how much the strange, bright kid believes in him. Vincent calls out to Shiren and tells him that, since he helped with work today, they will go to the city together tomorrow and load up on his favorite fruit. They walk, Vincent silently apologizes for being what he sees as a lacking father, while Shiren squeezes his arm and almost jumps from how excited he is. Vincent grips Shiren's hand and thinks that no matter what anyone says, this boy is his son, while Shiren admits he wants to know him better. Shiren lowers his head, clutching the red book, and admits that what he truly wants to know about is magic. And Vincent just ruffles his hair in gentle answer. Far from their quiet village, a bright city spreads out under the mountains, its tall castle and crowded streets marking the heart of a rural corner of the kingdom of Thormia Krias. Shiren leans over the side of the wagon, eyes wide and mouth open in a grin, amazed that this busy, towering place is the city he has only heard about. All around, people hurry between clothing shops and food stalls, kids tug their parents along, and the air is full of color and the smell of fresh bread and street snacks. In the middle of the noisy market, Vincent crouches to Shiren's eye level and explains that while he finishes his errands, Shiren has to wait for him at Martin's grandfather's shop nearby. Vincent reminds Shiren to stay away from dark alleys and nobles, clearly worried about leaving him here alone. The boy just laughs and promises he will listen, since he has never broken his word to his father. The wagon rattles away down the bright stone road, Vincent already mixing into the flow of carts and people as he goes to finish his work in the city. Sitting at the fruit stall, Shiren carefully writes out the word for blueberries and their price on a board, his letters clean enough to surprise any grown-up. The old shopkeeper thanks Shiren for writing the signs, but the boy just grins and says he really wants to help, happy to sit among the bright piles of fruit like part of the stall. Martin's grandfather watches Shiren work and thinks how sharp this kid is for his age, then chuckles to himself as he remembers how his own grandson only ever causes trouble. When the old man turns back with a smile, Shiren blurts out a question about magic, but the grandfather, half distracted, thinks the boy is talking about food instead. Shiren waves his red book and quickly explains he means real magic, asking what he has to do to use it. And the grandfather laughs as he finally gets what the boy is so fired up about. Playful picture sums it up, showing how kids first go crazy over dragons, then dream of being warriors, then mages, and later get hooked on things like bows and guns. Chiron hugged the thick red book to his chest, his eyes shining as if he had just found real magic inside its pages. The old shopkeeper scratched his cheek and said he was no mage, but he pointed down a side street, telling Chiron that the bookstore at the end was packed with books about magic. While he could look around and come back, Chiron shouted his thanks over his shoulder and sprinted toward the bookstore, while the old shopkeeper just laughed at the boy's energy. With the stall quiet again, the old shopkeeper opened Chiron's book and chuckled, remembering how he used to read the same kind of stories when he was young. As he scanned the first pages, the old man's smile faded, and he frowned, puzzled by what he was seeing inside this so-called children's book. The book was crammed with strange circles, symbols, and notes about the world and magic. And the shopkeeper suddenly realized that when Chiron asked how to use magic, the boy had been dead serious. At the bookstore, Chiron stretched for a thick volume on the top shelf, only for a sharp hand to smack his reach aside, the clerk clearly furious that he had even touched it. Chiron tried to explain he only wanted to peek at the book, but the bookstore clerk loomed over him, snapping that common kids like him had no business touching rare, expensive volumes meant for the rich. While the clerk fretted about her pricey books and snapped about dirty hands, Chiron quietly wondered where his father had even found his own book. The shop door opened and the landlord stepped in, pulling the clerk's attention away from him. The clerk greeted the landlord nervously and told him every book he had ordered was in, quickly asking how he wanted to pay. With them busy talking money, Chiron slipped back to the shelves and flipped through a thick volume as fast as he could. Out on the street again, Chiron sighed, thinking how crazy it was that just seeing a book could be this hard when he had even washed his hands first. The whole place felt like it only opened for people with money. As he walked, Chiron's eyes widened when someone ahead caught his attention, pushing his complaints about the shop out of his mind. A neatly dressed man in a suit strode by with a heavy box stacked full of books, and Chiron guessed he had to be linked to some noble house. The man with the box passed smoothly through a guarded stone gate, the kind that only nobles usually used. Keeping his head down, Chiron hurried after him, driven by the hope that those books might be the kind he had been dreaming about. Before he could catch up, the box tipped and books flew through the air, making Chiron skid in surprise as they tumbled all around him. Chiron stared stunned, as the man simply left the scattered books behind with the rest of the trash. In the corner of the yard, a whole mound of thrown-out books lay piled up, and he found himself standing before it, unable to believe anyone would toss them away like that. Staring at the worn green cover, Chiron wondered if this was the same kind of place his dad had gotten his own book from. A pair of well-dressed women walked by with clean, heavy books in their arms, and Chiron froze as he realized how out of place he looked beside them. Their skirts swayed and their polished heels clicked on the stone, the kind of shine that screamed money and comfort Chiron had never known. He remembered standing in their tiny room as his father knelt down and warned him to stay away from nobles, saying they were trouble for kids like him. Back on the street, Chiron kept walking, wondering why those people were allowed to stroll in and out so freely when he was told to stay away. Jaw set and eyes hard, Chiron headed straight toward the nobles, asking himself why they were welcome here while he was treated like he did not belong. Before he could slip any closer, a strong hand clamped onto his collar from behind, yanking him to a stop. The city guard glared down at Chiron, holding him like a stray and telling him this part of town was no place for a kid to wander alone. The stone gate rose over the path like a wall, marking where the nobles' quarter began and where kids like Chiron were not welcome. One guard kept a tight grip on Chiron's collar while demanding to know where he came from, and the boy hurriedly claimed his parents were somewhere close by, hoping they would just let him go. The guards traded looks and agreed he did not belong here, guessing he was an orphan being used by thieves and saying they would be taking him in. While Chiron's eyes widened as he understood, they now saw him as a criminal's helper. When the guard tightened his grip, he ended up clutching only Chiron's loose jacket as the boy slipped out of it and bolted. Down in the narrow street, the guard spun around in shock, one waving the empty jacket while yelling at the other to track the runaway kid down. Pressed low among bright flowers behind the wall, Chiron panted quietly and peered over the edge, wondering if the guards had finally given up and left. Chiron slowly straightened up, flicking leaves and tiny bugs from his hair as he let out a long breath of relief. Standing alone on the clean stone path with his shirt stretched and stained, Chiron stared at himself and groaned inside, already sure his dad was going to be furious when he heard about this. Chiron tilted his head back and stared at the lone shoe lying in the middle of the alley, only now noticing how rough his escape had been. He shuffled over, jammed his foot back into the shoe, and straightened his clothes, doing his best to look like just another kid on the street. As he rested against the wall, Chiron remembered a lesson where the headmaster had promised to explain what magic really was, but first showed how to put out a fire. He realized that lesson had taken place at an actual magic school, and he recalled the headmaster saying he would only show real magic if the class could answer one special question. In his memory, the headmaster asked which talent mattered most for learning magic, and the students eagerly yelled out things like wisdom, hard work, and even having enough money for books and tools. The students complained that he still had not told them what the real talent was, and the question hung in Chiron's mind. The teacher compared it to two clueless squirrels, saying that long ago even people did not know that 1 + 1 made 2 until many smart minds finally proved it. As Chiron listened, the headmaster said that some things go beyond what books teach, that real understanding comes from feeling and shaping ideas, and that magic is one of those hidden rules you have to accept with your insight. The headmaster called insight sharper than wisdom and quicker than effort, and Cheyenne stared up in awe as the man laughed and urged them to grow that gift so they could one day become true mages. Back in the present, Cheyenne wondered if a chance like that would ever reach him, and right then the old mage smiled and spoke, calling out to the child hiding behind the wall. Cheyenne jerked away from the wall, heart jumping as it hit him that he had been caught spying. He stared at his shaking hands, torn between bolting or answering, painfully aware of how rough and messy he looked and scared of whatever might follow. Then something clicked in Cheyenne's mind, a sharp thought cutting through the fear and noise. Deciding he could not stay frozen forever, Cheyenne pushed off hard and sprang toward the wall, ready to take his chance. As his fingers scraped over the top of the wall, the boy dragged himself up, already sure that if he backed down now, he would regret it for the rest of his life. He lifted his head and his eyes went huge, caught by a sight so bright and unreal that he forgot how tired his body felt. Spread out before him was a shining academy, white towers and green roofs rising over wide lawns where children sat in the shade, the whole place glowing like a dream he had only heard about. Headmaster Milchalpias chuckled as he looked toward the wall and asked if the boy had come to keep an old man company, making it sound less like a test and more like an open door. The boy slumped against the stone, cheeks burning and sweat running down his face, hardly able to believe he had really crossed into the academy grounds. He squeezed his eyes shut for a heartbeat, heart pounding, then pushed off the stones and dropped from the wall, choosing the unknown academy over the safety of running away. The boy walked toward the courtyard, fingers twisting in his sleeves, every step feeling way louder than it should. By the tree, robed students spun around, yelling that a lowly commoner had wandered in and ordering him to leave at once, while the headmaster just watched quietly. The boy froze at their shouts, cheeks burning as he realized every eye on the lawn was fixed on him. The headmaster let out a soft laugh and waved the boy over, asking which part of an old man's words had given him the courage to come. The boy lifted his head and, almost whispering, admitted he had come because he wanted to see real magic, something he had only ever dreamed about. He explained that books were the closest he had ever come to magic, which only made the noble kids scoff louder, calling him a liar and sneering at a commoner who dared to read. The boy bent so low his head nearly touched the grass, begging them to show him any magic at all, no matter how small. The headmaster chuckled that it was nothing hard and lifted his hand, promising to show them the magic of wind as the children leaned in, already buzzing with excitement. The boy blinked up at the sky, confused that the great magic he begged for was just wind. Before he could finish that thought, a wild gust wrapped around him, and his doubt snapped into pure shock as the air itself yanked him off balance. The courtyard exploded with swirling air, tossing the boy and every student around him straight into the sky like leaves in a storm. Once the first jolt passed, the boy felt weight vanish and a laugh burst out as he and the nobles spun through the air, cheering like they were on the best ride of their lives. The wind kept lifting them, turning the whole class into tiny dots against the clouds as the school shrank far below. Then the push from below vanished, and all at once the floating bodies turned into falling ones, dropping fast toward the distant ground. The boy spun headfirst toward the earth, terror finally crashing in as he realized this drop was very, very real. The grass and buildings rushed up to meet him, and he squeezed his eyes shut, convinced the magic show was about to end with him slamming into the courtyard. Instead of pain, there was only a strange quiet, like the world itself had hit pause before he could touch the ground. A huge laugh rolled across the yard, as if the old headmaster was enjoying a private joke with the sky itself. The boy peeked through his fingers and found himself just hovering over the grass while the other kids laughed and pointed, more amazed by the trick than worried for him. The headmaster, clearly pleased with himself, asked the class what they thought of that little taste of magic. With a wide grin, the headmaster told them that this playful storm was real magic, the kind that bent the world in ways normal rules could never explain. Later, the commoner boy knelt in the grass, heart pounding, and breathed the word magic like it was the most precious thing he had ever seen. The headmaster said that trying to break magic into simple steps missed the point, since real magic was the kind of thing that could ignore common sense and still work. The boy, eyes wet and voice shaking, begged him to stop talking in riddles and just tell him straight what magic really was. The other students stared at the commoner boy in shock, whispering that even teachers would never dare speak to the headmaster like that. The headmaster's golden eye narrowed slightly, but it was impossible to tell if he was angry or amused. The commoner boy stood in the sunlight, fists tight at his sides, refusing to back down now that he had finally asked what magic truly was. The headmaster let out a crooked laugh and said he would use harder words then, calling magic something that goes past normal logic, a work of the mind that digs into the truth behind each thing that happens. The boy repeated it slowly, calling magic an illogical thing, and said that maybe because it broke the rules so badly, it might actually point closer to what was really true. Standing under the wide tree with everyone staring at his back, the boy asked if that kind of twisted, rule-breaking power might actually bring them closer to the real truth. The headmaster burst into wild laughter, clutching his beard as he asked if even that sharp thought had been copied from some book. The boy hurriedly explained that it was not written anywhere, that he had noticed how many great people were first mocked for strange ideas that later became the base of new logic. Round the tree, the students traded amazed looks while the headmaster stroked his chin, as the boy finished by saying that maybe the real truth hides inside what seems strange and wrong at first. The headmaster softly agreed, clearly pleased by how far the boy's mind had already gone. Jamin finally blurts out the real question burning in his chest, asking how he can learn magic for himself while every student around him watches in shock. The headmaster grins, realizing this kid is not chasing some dream story but wants to study magic properly, gathering real facts on his own even if the work is tough. The headmaster wonders if this boy really thinks he can reach that goal. Shaman just stares ahead, wind tugging at his hair, his eyes set and unshaken. The headmaster sighs to himself, knowing that as a commoner shaman is not supposed to reach far. But instead of turning him away, he decides to give a real answer and invites the boy to watch a magic test up close. He calmly tells the class to step into what he calls the spirit zone, turning the lesson into something far more serious. The girl in the front row answers the headmaster at once, smiling brightly as she agrees to do exactly what he asked. Shaman glances around at his buzzing classmates, quietly repeating the strange term spirit zone to himself before noticing that somehow he has already crossed into it with them. Floating calmly under the tree, the headmaster closes his hand around a pile of coins and asks Shaman to tell him the exact number. And the boy answers with quiet certainty that there are 6. The headmaster opens his hand to show the coins, and Shaman's guess is spot on, leaving the whole class stunned and demanding to know how he did it. The headmaster calmly rolls the coins between his fingers as he explains that when a mage truly focuses, their mind turns so sharp they can feel everything around them, even tiny things far away like the number of leaves on the ground. The girl, still sweating from the strain, reports that the number of coins has changed again and says there are now 3. He explains that mages inside the spirit zone can feel the outside world in a way that goes beyond normal sight and hearing. The headmaster smiles and holds out the 3 coins, adding that within this state, a mage can not only sense things but also control what happens around them. Shaman slowly understands that no one was counting each coin at all. The entire scene in front of them was being felt as one whole picture. The headmaster states that this kind of sensing is something anyone can learn. Facing Shaman and the other kids, the headmaster tells them to practice alone in quiet places, first feeling their own presence and then letting it fade, saying that while anyone can try this path, only a few will truly manage to walk it. The headmaster leans in and tells Shaman that if he can pull this off, a whole new world will open to him. He checks that the boy really understands, warning that if Shaman cannot even feel his own presence, then wiping that presence away is completely out of reach. The headmaster smiles to himself, amused at how this kid keeps going beyond his expectations. He invites Shaman to try it for real, but in his mind he knows that if the boy cannot step into the spirit zone, then true magic will stay out of his reach. Shaman shuts his eyes and turns the question on himself, wondering what this thing called me even is. He decides it is not just his brain or body and tries to stop defining it, choosing instead to feel it and then peel away every part that seems like himself one by one. As the blue rings spread out from his feet, he realizes that it is not his whole being that must grow sharp, only his mind. Little by little, his awareness spreads until the whole group under the tree feels like a single picture in his mind. Every student and the headmaster wrapped inside the same quiet bubble. Back under the shade of the tree, the headmaster looks at Shaman and calmly asks how the attempt went. Resting his chin on his hand, the headmaster smiles and urges Shaman to explain what he actually felt while he was focusing. Shaman stands there catching his breath, sweat running down his cheeks, and manages to say that what came through the strongest was sound. He adds that it felt like he could hear every single sound around him, only for the headmaster and the other kids to laugh and remind him that anyone standing still can hear noises like that. The headmaster chuckles and nods, clearly amused, but also seeing just how early on Shaman still is in this path. The headmaster sighs, thinking that Shaman still cannot reach it. In his mind, the spirit world sits on a different level where senses twist together. Their sounds carry a smell, light has a taste, and even the shape of the land can be felt on the sky. The headmaster rests his hand on Shaman's head and praises his effort. He tells the boy that with steady work, he will be able to catch even more sounds than today. The headmaster calls an end to the special class and tells the group to head back to the school. The robed children follow him across the lawn, and Shaman answers from the shade, watching their backs as they walk away. Soon the yard falls quiet and Shaman is the only one left under the tree. Far off, the headmaster thinks it is a shame, since the boy clearly has talent. The headmaster looks over the gifted children around him and lets his mind drift back to the commoner boy. He wonders if, with a noble's birth and early training, Shaman could have stood on the same level as these kids. A small, tired smile touches the headmaster's face as he pulls himself back to reality. He tells himself that the world is already packed with gifted children, and one more talented commoner will not change much. While the headmaster moves on, Shaman bolts for the edge of the grounds and hauls himself up a tall stone wall. He does not look back at the school as he swings his legs over and drops to the other side. A sharp streak of light tore across the sky, as if some distant power had just been set loose. Far beyond the alley, a bright blue world hung in the dark, lines of light pouring toward it like everything in the sky was being dragged to one place. The boy's bright blue eye filled with tears as he stared ahead, suddenly sure that running away had dropped him into something far worse than class. Still shaken, Shaman rushed down the alley and slammed straight into a broad man's back, bouncing off him before he could even slow down. The boy was flung aside, skidding across the cobblestones until his back hit the wall and a sharp cry tore out of him. Gritting his teeth, Shaman pushed himself up and looked back, his heart racing as he saw who he had just run into. A group of rough men closed in, and the one Shaman had hit snapped at him, barking that some brat like him had no right to cause trouble and was already getting on his nerves. The leader grabbed Shaman by the shirt and hauled him up, raging that an apology was not enough and that the kid would pay for laying a hand on him, even sneering that a brat from the wolf gang should know better. Shaman clutched at the hand on his collar, his voice shaking as he blurted out that they had come here to take him out. A light, almost playful voice cut through the alley, asking what they were doing and if something fun was going on. Shaman and the thug turned toward the voice, and the boy's eyes went wide as he recognized Lady Amy and called out to her. Lady Amy walked up between the men, looking more bored than worried, as if she had just wandered into a game. Shaman stared at her, thinking he had to beg this noble girl to save him, stunned that someone so young could hold that kind of power. Green-haired brute laughed it off to the others, claiming this punk had tried to take him out and that he only meant to teach the kid a lesson. Shaman clung to his sleeve and shouted that he had only bumped into him by mistake. Another thug scoffed at Shaman's excuse and drove his boot into the boy's side, cutting off any chance to explain. Shaman curled on the cobblestones, coughing hard as the men loomed over him and said he still had to pay. One of them sneered about his so-called useless mother, demanding to know where she had gone. The brown-haired man frowned, remarking that the look in the boy's eyes had changed and asking if he had struck a nerve. Shaman covered his mouth, glaring up at them now, his fear burning into a sharp, cold anger. The green-haired brute snapped and drove a heavy kick into Shaman, sending the boy skidding down the alley while he cursed at him and dared him to talk back again. Shaman curled up and covered his head as kicks rained down, while one of the men casually told the others to watch his face and not go so far that the kids stopped breathing. With Shaman lying on the cobblestones, Lady Amy looked down at him and almost lazily asked if he was okay while the men watched with bored faces. Shaman pushed himself up on shaking hands and told her he had done nothing wrong, his voice small under the shadows of the men around them. He lay there with his cheek on the cold stone, tears slipping out as he tried to hold back his sobs. Lady Amy stretched as if bored and said they should quit this and find something more fun, like roughing him up a bit more and then selling him off to the southern village, adding that since he was just a commoner no one important would complain. Shaman stared at her, stunned that his whole life was being treated like a joke. Her talk about selling him off echoed in his head, and panic crashed over him as he thought of his mom and dad and what would happen to them if he disappeared. Lady Amy rested her chin on her hand, eyes gleaming, and mused that if they were going to make him a slave, they first had to strip him of everything he owned. Lady Amy watched the broken boy, and as if this were all a game, calmly suggested they should check for themselves whether he had anything worth taking. The men burst out laughing and started yelling that they should strip him completely, barking at Shaman to take off his clothes unless he wanted another beating. Lady Amy stared at them, taken aback, thinking they were out of their minds and hastily insisting she had only wanted a better look at his face. The noble girl frowned, suddenly uneasy, because in her mind this was supposed to be a short bit of fun before they let him go, not whatever this was turning into. Shaman stood there shaking, his eyes glowing a bright, unnatural blue, and for the first time the bullies wondered if the kid in front of them had just snapped. The green-haired brute threw his head back and laughed, still treating Shaman like a joke while the night air around them seemed to tighten. As he roared with laughter, a fat fly drifted in front of his open mouth, its wings humming right by his cheek. The brute's eye twitched as he finally noticed the fly hanging in the air before him, its red eyes shining in the blue light like a tiny warning that something was about to change. In the dark alley, a crow dropped out of the sky while the rats below squealed and reared up, as if the strange blue light had yanked them out of their tiny lives and into whatever was waking inside Shaman. The alley melted into a bright blue grid, and Shaman, along with every bully around him, was yanked off the ground and pulled into a strange, weightless space that felt nothing like the real world. Shaman stared up at the towering shapes around him, his bright eyes wide as he quietly wondered what this place even was. A thin pillar of light rose in front of him, and Shaman found himself standing between the grown men, drawn toward that bright point without even thinking. A blinding bolt of blue energy tore downward, racing all the way to a lonely tree far below, as if this strange world had just locked onto the place where everything first began for him. The view settled on the school lawn, where the old headmaster stood before the gathered kids, smiling as he lifted a glowing orb and promised to show them a simple spell that could call the wind. The orb in the headmaster's hand shattered into countless bright pieces that streamed down into Shaman, and the boy stared up, frozen, as the whole memory of that lesson crashed back into him at once. When the rush faded, a single bright cube still floated over his chest, pulsing softly like there was one more piece of that power left to sink in. One of the thugs yanked Shaman up by his shirt, screaming in his face and demanding to know if the kid was really just going to ignore him. Lady Amy's eyes went wide and she yelled for them to wait a second, clearly not okay with how far this was going. A roaring pillar of blue light burst up around Shaman, twisting the air into a wild spiral that climbed higher than the rooftops. Shaman stared up with wide, glowing eyes, barely breathing as he realized this storm of light was coming from him. In his bright blue eye, the thugs and broken scraps of the alley spun weightless, as if his gaze alone was holding them in that strange space. The strange grip finally snapped, and the bullies were hurled out of the blue void, tumbling through open air between the buildings with panicked cries. Shaman flinched as bodies and shattered bricks crashed down around him, the street shaking while his eyes glowed darker, trying to process what he had just done. The thugs lay scattered across the cobblestones, groaning in pain, and one clutched his twisted leg, crying out for someone to save him. The noble girl with blazing red hair rushed straight at Shaman, her dress whipping around like a storm as she called out to him, and he could only stare up from the cobblestones, frozen in shock. Lady Amy leaned in with burning eyes, and demanded to know who this kid was who had just turned the whole alley upside down. The young noble snapped that she wanted to know where he had learned to use magic, spitting out that someone like him should not have that power, while Shaman just stared back wide-eyed, still trying to understand what he had even done. Farther down the street, townspeople pointed toward the alley, shouting that they had heard some huge crash, and broken bricks still rolled across the stones between them and the two kids. Lady Amy let out a sharp breath and kicked off the ground, her body coiling like a spring as power whipped around her and the cobblestones cracked under her feet. Shaman craned his neck as her tiny figure shot across the gap between the buildings in a white arc, moving so fast it barely looked human. The boy gasped, unable to believe a girl could move like that, while a small crowd farther down the road waved their arms, yelling that someone had gone down in the middle of the street. Shaman slowly turned toward the cries, his heart pounding as he realized this mess was all because of him and he might not be able to just walk away. Shaman stared at the men lying all over the alley, broken crates and bricks around them, knowing this chaos started with him. He already felt that no one would listen to a poor kid even if he tried to explain. As Shaman turned and sprinted for the main street, the injured men groaned and yelled for someone to call for help. Their cries chased him down the alley, but his legs kept moving faster. The boy pushed himself harder, eyes squeezed shut as a single thought of his dad burned in his chest. He could not stop here, not when his father was still waiting for him. While he ran, Shaman thought about the kind of place he lived in, a world that never gave kids like him a fair chance. From above, the whole city looked calm, but to Shaman it was a hard place where commoners fell and no one cared unless they were useful. Far from the cramped streets, the vast Karmi's estate shone under the sun, home to first-class nobles who lived like royalty while the rest struggled below. Inside the mansion, Karmi's Shakura lowered his paper and calmly noted that his daughter was home earlier than she should be, asking if she had ditched class again. Lady Amy answered without shame, saying the lessons were dull and she had already learned everything worth knowing. Karmi sighed and told Amy that even a genius who coasts through life can get caught off guard one day. She stomped down the stairs in a huff, clutching her dress, but his warning clearly stuck with her. Karmi's lowered his paper, thinking that Amy was oddly quiet today, and asked what was going on with her. Amy shot back without mercy, calling him an unemployed dad and breaking any calm in the room. Lady Amy's eyes sharpened when she heard her father mention magic, the word hitting her harder than he expected. She could not believe he brought that up out of nowhere. A worried voice echoed over the quiet, snow-covered houses, calling Shiren's name again and again, as if he had already been gone too long. Inside the small house, the woman calmly said that Shiren had already headed to the lumber yard for more wood. And the man, still dusted with fresh snow, stiffened at the thought of the boy walking out there while the storm was still going. The man fell silent for a moment, then tightened his grip on the book and said he would go out himself to find Shiren. His boots crunched through the snow as he hurried along, and his mind jumped back to spring, to the day he first brought Shiren to the city and almost lost the boy for good. Back then, little Shiren had only said he wandered off and got lost. Yet the man had dropped to his knees and pulled him into a tight hug, shaken by how close he had come to losing the child in the crowded streets. Now he could not shake the question of what had truly happened, and in his mind he saw Shiren crying out in terror and a lone tree standing in a frozen grove, like the silent witness to something he had never been told. Out in the lumber yard, Shiren trudged through the thick snow with an axe in hand, standing small beneath the bare trees as he picked out one more trunk to cut, not knowing how hard someone was hurrying after him. Shiren's breath came out in white puffs as tears slipped down his cheeks, the freezing air mixing with a fear he could not quite name. His mind jumped back to that day when something inside him burst open, throwing his small body through the air as wild magic tore out on its own, a power he had never managed to call again since. No matter how hard anyone tried to study it, that outburst stayed a blank spot, because the whole process had been skipped over as if the world itself had looked away. The boy knew they had no way to explain it back then, since no one around him even understood what magic was. Yet a stubborn feeling in his chest said there was more to it than that. As his breath hitched and his eyes shone bright, the boy suddenly understood that the path from that day was not closed at all. He could still step into that hidden place he now sensed, a realm he would later call the Spirit Zone. In the next heartbeat, the snowy grove melted into a sea of blue light, and the boy found himself standing before the lone tree again. Only now it blazed like a living star at the heart of a new world. Inside this Spirit Zone, the tree was no longer just bark and branches. He could feel its shape, weight, and even its faint scent all at once, as if every part of it was pressing gently against his mind. Then his awareness snagged on a single bright point deep inside the trunk, a pulse of light that felt different from the rest and made him wonder what was hidden there. Without really knowing why, the boy tightened his grip on the axe and swung toward the glowing trunk, trusting the strange pull in his chest more than any lesson he had ever heard. The boy's heart raced as he locked onto that hidden power at last, feeling it flow from the glowing tree straight into his hands. He swung the axe with his whole body, blue light bursting out as if the Spirit Zone itself was pouring through the blade into the tree. The impact roared through the trunk, blue force racing up the wood as the tree cracked and burst apart from the inside. A breath later, the whole trunk was gone, leaving the boy standing on a glowing stump while broken pieces rained down around him. He stared at the stump, stunned as it hit him that this strange power had let him drop that huge tree with a single swing. The child's eyes shone with joy as he whispered to himself that this had to be magic. From behind a nearby trunk, a hunter stared wide-eyed, unable to believe the kid had just pulled off a move he knew as Thunder Strike, a blow that hits the very core of a tree and drops it in one swing, loud enough to sound like a clap of thunder. The hunter kept staring from his hiding place, sweat running down his face as he tried to make sense of how a small boy had just used a technique only seasoned fighters were supposed to know. The boy did not stop at one swing. He set a saw to the fallen trunk and worked it back and forth, turning that miracle strike into real, solid labor. Watching from the trees, the hunter told himself this was just one lucky hit out of 100 tries, nothing more. The boy's eyes widened as he realized the power in his hands felt just like that strange magic he had seen once before. The hunter's eyes filled with tears as it hit him that this child might truly hold the same kind of power he had only heard about in legends. Jaw set, the hunter reached for an old red book, ready to share the hard-earned skills that could turn the boy's wild gift into something real. In his mind, the hunter set a path. The boy needed real knowledge, not lucky flashes, so they would drill and study day after day, never stopping, all for chance that might only come once in his life. 3 long years of work and waiting slipped by. Now older and broader in the shoulders, the boy sat on the same stump where his power had first burst out, watching the leaves drift past in the warm light. The young woodcutter brought the axe down again, shaving clean chunks from the old stump as he tested how steady his strength had become. Standing in the quiet woods, the boy pressed his palm to the trunk and admitted that this power was not something he watched with his eyes, but something he sensed deep inside. With that feeling guiding him, he lifted the axe high and swung with everything he had, his gaze sharp and locked on the spot he had chosen. He did not aim by sight. He simply trusted that strange sense and let the axe fly, and the blow landed so cleanly that the whole tree shuddered around him. The next instant, that simple swing turned into a roaring pillar of blue light, ripping through the trees as the boy stood beneath it, gripping the handle and feeling the old miracle answer him again. Later, as red leaves drifted around him, the young lumberjack rested the axe on his shoulder and thought about how he had nearly packed up after only meditating, not knowing how close he was to breaking through. He stared ahead, eyes bright, and slowly worked out just how long he had been standing there chasing that feeling. Only then did it hit him that he had been locked in that strange focus for 5 full hours, the whole forest around him now feeling sharper and somehow different than before. The young woodcutter stood in the blue glow, feeling like his body and the forest were one thing, every leaf and branch moving inside his mind. He could feel worms twisting in the soil and even hear trees pulling in water. And he knew that 5 hours was nothing if he wanted to calmly take in every bit of this new world. He remembered the old man talking about a world unlike the one they knew. And as the young lumberjack headed out with his bundle, he quietly admitted that this really did feel like living in a different world than before. With the sun sinking through the red and gold leaves, the young woodcutter started down the path toward town, his load of firewood feeling lighter than ever. He told himself that was enough for today and that it was time to head back home. As he neared the village, the young woodcutter stopped short at the sight of 2 white horses blocking the path, wondering who on earth they belonged to. When he reached his yard, a dark carriage covered in gold trim stood there, and as he set down his firewood, he guessed that some rich guest had come calling. He pushed open the wooden door and stepped into the warm light, calling out as he came in to let everyone know he was back. Cheyenne froze as soon as he stepped in, his eye widening when he spotted his dad sitting with someone he had never seen before. His mother greeted him in a shaky voice, and his father, looking tense at the table, told Cheyenne to come over and greet their important visitor. The older man adjusted his monocle and calmly introduced himself as Timurin, an associate butler serving the mighty Ojent family. Cheyenne bent at the waist in a stiff bow, gave his name, and said he was honored that Timurin had come all this way just to see him. In his head, Cheyenne replayed what he had heard about the Ojent family, a house ranked just below the royal line itself. He could not grasp why someone serving such high nobles would bother with a poor woodcutter's son, but Timurin simply took his arm and said he wanted to look him over first. Timurin tilted Cheyenne's face up, studying his features, then suddenly asked if the boy could read, and Cheyenne, a bit startled, admitted he had been sneaking books since he was small. With Timurin standing behind him in deep thought and a firm hand on his shoulder, Cheyenne shifted uneasily and asked him to finally explain why he was being tested like this. Timurin calmly lists what he has heard about Cheyenne, calling him a rare son of a mountaineer who can read and takes care of his parents. Cheyenne's mother bursts out in protest, but the butler ignores her and finally asks Cheyenne if he wants to work for the Ojent family. Cheyenne stares at him, barely able to understand what he just heard. Timurin explains that the Ojent main house is moving everything in its great library, around 10,000 books, and that some of them are too secret for normal people to even know about. He adds that all of this has to be finished within 2 years. The butler goes on, saying the heavy lifting will be left to the servants, but the real work of sorting the books will be done only by him and Cheyenne. In Cheyenne's head, just one thing echoes over and over: the library. Cheyenne's heart races as he imagines the Ojent family's library packed with secret knowledge for mages that no normal person could ever reach. It feels like the door to his dream is opening, yet a nagging worry makes him hold back. Timurin explains that the only people allowed to know about this transfer are Cheyenne and his family. He warns that if even a rumor spreads about those books getting out, the Ojent family will treat it as a betrayal, and none of them will be allowed. Cheyenne finally understands why his parents look so stiff, knowing now that this offer could cost them everything. Timurin adds that because the job risks Cheyenne's life, he plans to pay a huge sum in return. Timurin calmly says the pay will be more than the family could earn even in their best hunting years, calling it a reward for raising such a good son. Cheyenne's father slams the table and yells that they did not hear him out because of the money. Face red and voice shaking, Cheyenne's father cries that all he ever wanted was a chance for his boy to live a better life than a poor hunter in the mountains. Cheyenne's father grips the table back tense, holding on to the one thing that matters to him, giving his son a real chance to follow his dreams. Timurin bursts out laughing and mocks the hunter, saying a boy like Cheyenne will never become anything, and claiming the only reason to beg for this job is money. The hunter yells that Cheyenne can read the books, but Timurin just nods and says that is exactly the problem, since no one can keep an eye on the boy every second. Timurin's words hang in the air, reminding the hunter that he was the one who begged for path toward his son's dreams. The hunter freezes as Timurin suggests that all this talk about dreams was just a story he fed his son, not something he ever truly believed. He wonders if Cheyenne is bent over a book even now, and his mind jumps back to when Alina first played around teaching a few words, only for their boy to be reading on his own by 6. He pictures the bright-haired boy by the fire, standing out like some young noble, and admits to himself that Cheyenne's quick mind is so rare it almost feels like he was born to a royal house instead. The hunter cannot stop himself from thinking that if Cheyenne had grown up in a noble house instead of theirs, his son's gifts might already have taken him somewhere far beyond this tiny room. The hunter thinks how Cheyenne could have studied in a real school, and the thought tears at him. He forces it away, gripping his face, and reminds himself that Cheyenne is his son, not someone else's dream. He remembers deciding that a mountaineer's son had to learn mountain work, no matter how bright the boy was. Down in the woods, young Cheyenne bends over a heavy saw, fighting with a thick log under the warm autumn light. Once Cheyenne actually started working in the mountains, the hunter's pride turned into cold fear. Now he clutches his head, eyes wide, hating that he raised such a rare child as nothing more than a mountaineer's son. He thinks back to that one question he heard, the chance that someone out there needed a commoner who could read. In the memory, the hunter drops to the cold stone and begs the older man to take his boy, saying Cheyenne has read smoothly since he was little and is smarter than anyone he knows. He does not care how low he looks, as long as it gives his son a chance. Bowing so low his voice shakes, the hunter begs them to at least let Cheyenne stay close to books, even if nothing else is given. Back in the cramped house, the hunter faces Timurin and says he never wanted a single coin from him. If he had known it would twist into this, he thinks, he would never have lowered himself to beg in the first place. His face twists with fury as everything boils over, and he roars at Timurin to leave his house at once. In that shout, he throws away the favor, the job, and every excuse, holding on only to his son. The noble with the monocle sneered to himself, thinking this was what happened to people who forgot their place. Cheyenne cut through his thoughts and calmly said he would take the job. The noble's eye tightened behind the glass. He had not expected the boy to accept so easily. Cheyenne stood firm facing the noble, but his father burst out behind him, shouting his name in disbelief. The boy's calm eyes made the father's fear stand out even more. The noble spelled it out, saying that even the smallest rumor about this work could get Cheyenne wiped out. Cheyenne listened without flinching and still asked to be allowed to take it on. Cheyenne met the noble's eyes and promised he would never let the secret slip, saying that even if everything went wrong, he would not hold it against the man who hired him. The noble's smile deepened as he admitted that Cheyenne's resolve had moved him, then he said he would return in a week to collect the boy. Until they stepped into the manor, Cheyenne was free to change his mind, but once inside, there would be no turning back. With that, the noble turned his back on the small house and stepped into the fading light, reminding Cheyenne that once he entered the manor, he would not be able to leave until everything was finished. As the door closed, Cheyenne's father exploded, demanding to know why his son had agreed to something like that and cursing the nobles for needing a scapegoat. He shouted that it was his own fault and begged Cheyenne to refuse and let him carry the burden instead. The father pointed at his son with a shaking hand, eyes shining with tears, and called out to him. But Cheyenne's quiet answer showed his mind was already made up. Cheyenne spread his arms and smiled through his tears, thanking his father for giving him such a huge chance. Cheyenne's father stared at him, tears pouring down as the weight of his son's resolve finally sank in. The father grabbed Cheyenne and crushed him in a tight hug, shouting that his boy did not need to worry because his own father would protect him. Clinging to his son, the father ordered Cheyenne to come back safe and swore he would not let anyone touch their family while he was gone. Their mother watched with wet eyes, wiping her cheeks as she wondered if this was the moment her son had truly grown up. Father and son held each other without speaking, both crying as they tried to fix this moment in their minds before it slipped away. A week later, the noble stood by his carriage while Cheyenne's father signed the contract, and the man in the suit calmly said the paperwork was finished. As the paper left his hands, Cheyenne's father looked up with a tight, shaken face, already feeling how heavy that single signature really was. The suited man urged Cheyenne toward the waiting carriage, telling him to hurry and drop his luggage by the door. Cheyenne glanced back over his shoulder, already feeling how far from home he was about to be. The carriage door swung shut behind Cheyenne with a sharp thud, cutting off the yard from view. The older man inside lowered his eyes to his papers, as if this trip was just another job. Inside the rich carriage, Cheyenne sat with his hands locked together, squeezed between the two men who watched him like cargo. The soft cushions and gold trim only made him feel more out of place. Cheyenne shut his eyes, and the last image of his parents holding each other filled his mind in a soft blue glow. That memory was the only thing keeping his fear from spilling over. In his heart, Cheyenne called out to his mother and father, clinging to them even though they were already far behind. In his mind, Cheyenne's glowing hands stretched toward his parents as they clung to each other, but the gap between them felt endless. Wanting to run back hurt almost as much as leaving. The carriage wheels bit into the dirt and rolled forward, slowly pulling Cheyenne's old life farther behind with every turn. Even as the carriage carried him off, Cheyenne could almost feel his hand reaching back toward his parents, as if one more stretch might let him hold them again. But all he could grasp was empty light. Cheyenne pressed his hands together and bowed his head, trying to steady his shaking as a faint blue light flickered across his face. The carriage rattled down the bright forest road, carrying him toward a chance that could either change his life or break it. Shayan tightened his jaw, thinking about the monsters in human form he was about to serve under. He stared into the glowing blur of the road ahead and wondered if someone as weak as him could really make it through the next 2 years alive. Hours slipped by in a blue haze as the carriage rushed on, dragging him farther from home and closer to the world he had only heard about in stories. Far to the east lay the kingdom of Thormia, and inside its capital region sat the city of Krias, home of the Ogent family, a warrior line known for raising official swordsmen. One of the escorts told Shayan that the previous Ogent head had been a third-class swordsman, while the current Lord Bishop Ogent now held the title of official fourth-class knight, giving their house real control over the city's strength. With a small grin, the man added that the Ogent estate even had its own pride and joy, a place everyone talked about called the Great Walkway, leaving Shayan staring in stunned silence. An endless path lined with blazing autumn trees stretched toward a huge mansion, the Great Walkway rising before Shayan like the gate to a whole new world. Shayan almost jumps at the escort's joke about the Ogent family being full of monsters, then stiffens when the other man warns that one wrong word here could cost him everything. He follows the men down the glowing autumn path, and as the vast mansion rises out of the trees, it finally hits him that this is no dream. The path opens onto a grand fountain and a stone crest of a rearing horse and sword, the proud mark of the Ogent family that now owns his next 2 years. They stop before a lone tower wrapped in golden light, the butler's quarters that will double as Shayan's home from now on. Inside a quiet office packed with books, an older butler straightens from his desk and calls out, already expecting the new boy. The head butler steps past Shayan with a heavy book in hand, and the boy hurries after him, promising to work hard as the man tells him he will lay out every duty in detail. The great doors creak open, flooding the hall with warm light and pulling Shayan toward whatever waits inside. Rows of towering shelves stretch up into the glass ceiling, and Shayan almost forgets to breathe as he realizes he will be working inside the great library of the Ogent family. The head butler explains that Shayan will spend his days pulling books from these endless shelves, following weekly lists, working from morning until evening with free time only inside the estate. The head butler offers a stack of papers and says the common butler will drill him on house rules, then calmly asks if Shayan has anything he wants to ask before they begin. Shayan thinks that this chance is worth his life, and without hesitating, asks when he can start working. The next day, the grand Ogent library rises before him, its doors shut like a gate to a whole new life. Wearing a neat butler uniform and clutching his first list, Shayan walks into the rows of shelves, ready to prove he belongs here. As he flips through the thick pile of guidelines, Shayan realizes why this job can't be split, since one person has to keep the whole library's order straight in their head. In his mind, he pictures a book on the history of swordsmanship, and notes how one person might file it under sword skills, while another might treat it as pure history, twisting the whole system. Leaning over his notes with a firm look, Shayan keeps writing, turning what he has learned about organizing into his own method that no one can argue with. As he stares at the piles of notes, Shayan pictures all knowledge tied together like a glowing loop. He decides that the line holding everything in place is history itself. Shayan plans to use history as a base, knowing it will make every other subject easier. Out of 10,000 books, he counts around 850 on history and swears he will finish them all in the 2 years he has here. He thinks about how this crazy reading plan is the only way to reach his dream of becoming a mage. When footsteps echo near the door, Shayan straightens up, wondering if the strict vice butler has come to check on him. Shayan shuts the book in a hurry, heart pounding. He knows he cannot let anyone see him reading like this, since no one ever gave him clear permission. The head butler walks into the library with a report in hand and asks if the organizing is going well, pointing out that Shayan seems to be working late again. Standing stiff in his vest, Shayan answers that he is, taking the extra hours without complaint. The head butler tells him not to push his body too hard and reminds him that every mistake in this place will fall on his shoulders alone. Shayan answers that he will be careful, even as he feels that heavy truth settle on his back. The old butler slows his steps and glances back, studying the boy who just took on such a burden without flinching. Then the head butler spins around and marches straight back toward him, coat swinging. Shayan stiffens in surprise, sensing that this visit is not over yet. Head butler suddenly grabs Shayan by the shoulders and leans in, his face stern. Shayan freezes, sweat running down his cheek, sure he has just been caught reading when he should be working. Instead of yelling about books, the head butler just tells Shayan to keep his vest and shirt perfect, since even servants share the Ogent family's name. Shayan listens quietly, knowing one loose button could stain their pride. The old butler eyes him up and down, then tugs at Shayan's long hair with a disapproving look, telling him to do something about this mess. Shayan nods, fast sweat forming as he promises to fix it. After a brief farewell, the head butler walks off, and Shayan stands there shaking with a strained smile. As soon as the man is gone, he lets out a breath and tells himself he has to keep this focus up for years. Under the clear night sky above the great library, Shayan decides he cannot afford even small mistakes here. He even thinks about tying his hair back like his father, if that helps him blend in. Back inside, the huge library towers over Shayan as he bends over his desk, a single lamp in a sea of shelves. He realizes that looks and manners are nothing compared to the real problem waiting in these pages. Hours later, Shayan clutches the open book and feels his head spin, the words blurring together. He finally admits to himself that this is just plain hard. He stares at the lines about 3 emperors and 7 kingdoms and feels crushed. Just one kingdom is already a headache. Shayan wonders if he should just cram more facts, then decides that if he wants to call on this knowledge anytime, he has to grasp every event clearly, not just stuffed names in his. Chayern's eyelid droops, his bright blue eye losing focus as sleep finally wins over all that forced studying. He slumps forward onto the open book, breathing softly while the lone lamp throws a small circle of light over the mess of pages. A white-gloved hand slips in and gently lifts the book from beside Chayern's head, as if checking what this worn-out boy thought was worth losing sleep over. The head butler stands over him with a lantern and the book, sighing that this thing is painfully boring and that he is stuck holding onto it for a whole moon cycle. Chayern stands behind the counter, calmly telling the staff they can take the stacks he sorted, proud that the work now feels easy and that he has picked up all kinds of little facts from the other butlers. Senior butler steps up with a red book saying he will borrow it, then adds that the second young master will be wanting it again, like this is already a habit. Chayern the record sheet and gasps when he hears the second young master never brought back the last batch, while the senior butler frets that missing books will land the blame on them, no matter who borrowed them. The senior butler shrugs that if books go missing, only the butlers will be scolded, since the nobles barely notice the library and keep the truly important texts locked away elsewhere. Then he makes Chayern promise to keep this whole talk to himself, leaving the boy uneasy. The senior butler waves and heads off, telling Chayern to keep up the good work, and Chayern bows back, thinking how the easy lives of nobles only exist because commoners like them quietly hold everything together. In his mind, Chayern recalls the head butler's cold lesson about commoners staking their lives on tasks nobles will soon forget, along with the grim promise that if they ever mess up, those above will do whatever it takes to erase the mistake. Back in the bright hall, Chayern grits his teeth about that old man's harsh words, then spots the blue-haired second young master bolting down the carpet, dragging Chayern's worries about missing books into a very real chase. Chayern stiffens, sweat beading on his face as he looks up, feeling like trouble itself has just walked in and wondering what new mess he is about to be dragged into. The blue-haired youngest young master, Ryan, barrels down the hall, panting and annoyed that even today he cannot catch a break. A furious shout from down the corridor warns Ryan that running away will earn him 100 extra laps, so he swears under his breath and sprints even faster toward the library desk where Chayern is working. Ryan grabs Chayern's shoulder and hurriedly orders him not to tell anyone he came in here, while Chayern stares up, stunned by how tall the so-called tiny young master actually is. Before Chayern can answer, the young master drops flat and wriggles under a nearby desk, leaving the butler alone in the open as heavy footsteps rush toward the library. Harsh voice booms through the hall, shouting that Ryan is hiding in here, and Chayern feels sweat run down his neck as he glances at the pair of boots sticking out from under the desk. Towering man with a long beard storms into the library and barks at Chayern, asking if a tiny kid with blue hair just ran inside, while Chayern cannot help thinking that if Ryan is tiny, he must look even smaller right now. Putting on his best servant smile, Chayern says it sounds like the man is talking about the youngest young master and then carefully asks for the stranger's name, hoping to stall without giving Ryan away. The man snaps that he is the swordmaster who trains that brat, bragging that he can thrash Ryan anytime and warning Chayern to stop playing games and hand the boy over unless he wants to be the first one punished. Chayern forces a nervous smile and calmly points out that the young master is hiding under the desk, while Ryan's eyes glow in shock from the shadows. Swordmaster hauls Ryan out by his collar, and the blue-haired brat flails and insists it is all just a misunderstanding while Chayern can only stare frozen. Ryan is hurled through the air like a rag doll, teeth bared and eyes wild, while Chayern presses himself against the shelves, stunned by how brutal this so-called training looks. Out in the hall, Chayern leans against the wall and winces at each distant thud, half relieved he is safe and half sorry for the poor young master. The swordmaster stomps down the hall, gripping Ryan by the ankle and dragging him along the carpet while the boy's eyes spin, his pleas completely ignored. Pulled upside down across the floor, Ryan stares ahead with wide, empty eyes, finally understanding that this time his teacher really plans to break him in. Chayern admits to himself that with the teacher holding the noble family's power, he never really had a choice, and he remembers the rumor that Ryan once got hauled off into the mountains and did not come back for almost a month. Days stack up as Chayern buries himself in the library, and before he knows it, he has pushed through a staggering 82 history books. Chayern flipped through the pages, thinking that the start had been the worst part, but now the patterns were clear. After pushing through around 200 volumes, he felt sure the rest would fall much faster. Doubt crept in about whether burying himself in history was really smart right now. But as he recalled the feats of past magicians, he felt certain he had chosen the right road. In his head, he pictured calm scholars chasing ideas and robed magicians turning those same ideas into real power. To him, that was the gap he needed to cross. Chayern thought about how magicians needed a mind tuned far sharper than any normal scholar. Without that fragile, focused state, they could never step into the spirit zone at all. He opened the next book and decided that all this knowledge would be the very ground of his spirit zone. If he packed that inner space with information, maybe it would finally answer him. Feeling bold, Chayern told himself that with this plan he might finally become a true magician. His thought barely finished before Ryan stormed down the hall, screaming at him in raw anger. Ryan staggered in, covered in marks and shaking, shouting that he had gone through pure hell just to get here today. Watching him seethe, Chayern could only admit that the guy's stubbornness was on a whole other level. Chayern, half shocked and half worried, asked if Ryan had really dragged himself back here just for this. Ryan roared that of course he had, as if any other answer would be insane. Ryan ranted about how he had dragged himself up and down sheer cliffs over and over, each time sure he would fall, holding on only because he wanted payback. Chayern watched him, thinking that Ryan's anger had gone way past normal and wondering if this was really only about the pain he went through. Ryan stepped in close and shouted that he had trusted Cheyenne with a favor. But instead Cheyenne had gone and exposed him, and nothing made him madder than that kind of cowardice. Cheyenne held his ground, saying he had only spoken honestly. But Ryan grabbed his vest and barked that if Cheyenne was going to do that, he should never have agreed to help in the first place. Inside, Cheyenne sighed, thinking that people born with power always bent reasons to fit whatever they wanted. Cheyenne met his glare and simply asked what he could do to make things right. Ryan stared back, stunned that a fresh lowly butler could stay that calm in front of him. Ryan decided that calm look meant Cheyenne was looking down on him, and a sharp grin spread across his face as he told the butler to come along so he could show what he was really like. Ryan walked ahead without looking back, leading him into a wide hall, and Cheyenne followed, freezing as he realized where they had come. They had stopped at the training ground, and Cheyenne's gut sank as he wondered if Ryan planned to hit him until his anger cooled. He decided he would just take whatever blows came, since that was still better than losing everything. His parents had risked their lives to get him this chance, and he refused to throw it away here. Instead of swinging at him with bare hands, Ryan whipped several wooden swords through the air toward Cheyenne, barking for him to take one. Cheyenne fumbled but managed to catch one of the flying blades, staring at the smooth wood in shock. It hit him that Ryan was not planning to just rough him up, but to drag him into a proper sword match. Ryan rested his wooden sword on his shoulder and called for a duel, saying he was no coward who would just take insults. He swore he would one day stand as the greatest swordsman in the world, and that he would make Cheyenne pay for daring to look down on him. Ryan's taunts hit harder than any strike, and Cheyenne suddenly wondered if he had really been that cowardly. As a butler serving the Ogent family, he felt he should be the one standing up for them, not backing down to save his own skin. Ryan snapped that Cheyenne had thrown him under the cart just to avoid his teacher's fists, leaving someone in real trouble to fend for himself. As those words landed, his gaze turned razor sharp, and Cheyenne could tell something inside that noble had just shifted. Gripping the wooden sword with shaky hands, Cheyenne faced him head-on. He might be treated as worthless by his own family, but he decided he would not let someone like Ryan trample his pride. Ryan dropped into a low stance, wooden blade humming with power, and told Cheyenne to come at him, even offering 3 free swings because their skill gap was that wide. Watching that wild, fearless grin, Cheyenne finally understood why people called him an Ogent through and through. Cheyenne's hands shook around the wooden sword as he imagined bones snapping and his chance at this life ending on the spot. He knew that if he hurt the young master, he'd be thrown out without a second thought. With his heart racing, he racked his brain for any move that would let him swing without ruining everything. Then something clicked, and his wide eyes steadied as a single idea formed. With only 3 swings to work with, he decided he would bet everything on the one thing he might actually pull off. Cheyenne lifted the sword over his head with a sharp breath and drove his body forward. He poured all his strength into that first swing, not holding back at all. The wooden blade carved a bright arc across the yard as Cheyenne's strike rushed straight at Ryan. That first swing roared toward the noble like a wave, the start of his 3 precious chances. The moment his strike landed, a brutal shock shot up Cheyenne's arms, almost tearing the sword from his grip. He had known Ryan was strong, but feeling that power stop his full swing made his stomach drop. His fingers almost slipped, but Cheyenne clamped both hands around the hilt and forced it back under control. He would not waste his first swing by dropping the sword like a fool. Cheyenne leaned his whole weight into the locked blades, teeth clenched trying to force Ryan's guard to crumble. The young master held steady under him, muscles tight, proving that even Cheyenne's full effort barely pushed him back. Ryan's eyes stayed cool and sharp as the wooden blades smashed together, bits of wood breaking off around him. He absorbed the force without flinching, as if Cheyenne's desperate first swing was nothing more than a warm-up. The young master rested the wooden sword on his shoulder and smirked, calmly counting this as the second swing he had brushed aside. Cheyenne's breath came out rough as sweat ran down his cheek, and he told himself that with only 1 swing left, he had to make this next move count. Cheyenne's eyes lit up and he pushed away the fear, calling out in his head that it was time. Blue light burst around his body as he dropped into a low, focused stance, pouring every bit of strength into this last try. The servant planted his feet and raised his sword in a way that looked wrong by every rule of training. The young master frowned at the sight, yet still dropped from above with a fierce overhead swing, ready to crush whatever trick this was. Their wooden blades met in a sharp cross, the impact bursting out in sparks and splinters, and the young master realized with surprise that the angle of Cheyenne's swing made it feel harder to dodge than to meet it head-on. The young master glanced up at the crack running through his wooden blade and only grinned wider, calling out that Cheyenne's turn was over. Lifting the damaged sword high as shards rained down, he readied himself to answer with his own strike. He drove the cracked sword down with full force, wooden shards exploding around him. But as the blow landed, his eyes widened, hit by an outcome he had not expected at all. The 2 wooden swords smashed together in a burst of light, sending splinters spinning through the air as their strength crashed head-on. Ryan held his sword high as wooden chunks rained around him, and a jolt of shock ran through him when he felt that something in his strike had gone wrong. His eye widened as he stared at the jagged stump in his hand, watching the rest of his wooden sword fall away in pieces. Cheyenne stood there gasping, blue power still curling around his feet, clutching the splintered hilt as it hit him that he had really stopped that blow. In his head, Cheyenne marked that his plan had hit perfectly on the 3rd strike, while Ryan just stood there in stunned silence, gripping his broken sword. The servant's eyes trembled as he looked at his master, hardly believing that the risky move he had drilled for years had actually worked in real combat. Ryan clenched the ruined sword and, still breathing hard, called out to the servant, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and curiosity. Staring at the shattered blade in his hand, the young master demanded to know where a mere servant had picked up sword skills strong enough to break his guard. Chiron, still shaking, blurts out that what he used was not normal swordplay at all but a move called Thunder Strike, leaving Ryan staring at him in disbelief. The servant boy admits his father was a lumberjack and that he followed him into the mountains, but his body was too weak to swing an axe, so he built this strange strike to make up for what he lacked. Ryan listens as Chiron says lumberjacks call the move Thunder Strike, and the young master can only stare, wondering what kind of nonsense he is hearing. The noble thinks back on the 15 years he has spent with a sword in his hand, and refuses to accept that a trick learned while cutting firewood could break through his guard like that. His thoughts jump back to the first time his own practice sword snapped apart in training, the sharp crack still clear in his mind. In the training hall of his childhood, a gifted boy showed off sword slaughter and the instructor praised him as a 12-year-old genius, while young Ryan sat on the floor with a broken sword, hearing that his rival already stood above all the others. The instructor laughed proudly, claiming the prodigy had clearly taken after his own genius and even talking about throwing a grand feast, while young Ryan could only watch from the floor, burning that moment into his heart. Back in that memory, the boy's eyes filled with angry tears as he clenched his fist, swearing to himself that he would not stay beneath anyone forever. That one memory twists inside Ryan until it bursts out as a single angry question about why he is always behind. In Ryan's mind, the name Ojent Rai roars again, the man's cold figure towering over everything. Right in front of him, Chiron reaches out nervously, trying to get his young master's attention. Ryan throws his head back and roars, raging that no matter how hard he trains, he still cannot catch up, and he flat out refuses to accept this outcome. Chiron flinches, starting to ask if he did something wrong, but Ryan's furious shout cuts him off, leaving the servant frozen with his heart pounding. Without another word, Ryan walks to the rack and pulls out a real sword, his fingers tightening around the hilt as if he has already made up his mind. Ryan whips a long wooden weapon toward Chiron, ordering him to grab it, and the servant scrambles in surprise as it slams into his hands. Ryan states that broken wooden blades do not settle anything, and that if Chiron can already pull off sword slaughter, then he deserves to be treated like a real swordsman. Ryan points straight at Chiron and lays it out. In 1 month they will meet here again, not with wooden toys but with real swords on the line. Chiron lowers his head, his whole body shaking as cold sweat runs down his face, finally grasping how serious Ryan's promise of a real duel is. His hands clutch the wooden sword so hard his fingers ache, and the thought of facing Ryan with real steel makes him feel like he might not survive. The servant blurts out that using real swords is madness, begging Ryan to rethink this because he has never even learned real swordsmanship. Ryan's gaze stays steady as he says that is exactly why he is giving Chiron a month, adding that anyone who mastered sword slaughter just by cutting trees should be able to survive real training. Ryan makes it clear there is no backing out now and warns Chiron not to even consider running away. Chiron grips the practice sword with numb hands, stunned as he understands that Ryan plans to overtake him for real and has tied that goal to a duel that could cost them both everything. Time moves on, drawing a line under that night's reckless promise. Morning light pours over the Ojent estate while Chiron slumps over his desk, sighing as he finally understands that the Ojent bloodline is marked by black and blue hair and that this strange family he serves is far from simple. Chiron runs through the Ojent family in his head, from the eldest son who already reached 6th class with the sword to the blue-haired sister who plays piano in the royal palace, and even the other brother who is called a genius with a blade. A worried servant explains that Ryan is nothing like his gifted siblings, saying that even with a private instructor he is still seen as the untalented one and everyone in the house knows it. Chiron buries his head in his hands, cursing himself for showing off and thinking he should have just taken the blow, instead of wounding the pride of someone who has always been measured against prodigy siblings. At the same time, he grumbles inside that nobles always act like they are above everyone else. Tears hanging on his lashes, Chiron admits to himself that he always thought the only thing that could really ruin him was some hard book question, not a duel that might actually cost him his life. His thoughts jump to his parents, and the idea that he might not make it leaves him cold as he wonders what would happen to them without him. He cuts off the spiral in his head, telling himself he cannot sit here shaking when time is already running out. Chiron straightens up with a book in hand and tells himself to think, reminding himself that he is going to be a mage, and that all those years in the mountains gave him the stamina to push through whatever training this duel demands. His eyes jump from one sword book to another as a single thought hits him. If he can at least learn how to block, he might walk away from this duel alive. Chiron clutches the heavy book, sweat running down his cheek, and decides he will use every last bit of strength and time he has to prepare. A raw scream tears out of him, blasting away the last of his hesitation. Out on the yard, Ryan hurls his body forward, legs burning as he sprints like a wild animal around the track. Ryan streaks past his bearded instructor, who yells that the boy has already gone over 100 laps, stunned by how hard he is pushing himself. The instructor breaks into a wide grin, saying Ryan even beat the old record, and joking that he never thought the hit-headed noble would follow training orders this well. Hands on his knees and sweat dripping to the dirt, Ryan pants out a complaint about this insane training, leaving the instructor staring at him, not sure he heard right. Ryan jerks himself upright, rage and pride burning in his eyes, and snaps that he is still standing, daring the instructor to bring out something even tougher. The instructor eyes Ryan's shaking, sweat-soaked body and asks what on earth happened to him, but Ryan snaps back that nothing has changed. The old man can tell that is a lie, because the boy in front of him feels completely different from the lazy brat he knew. The instructor wonders if this sudden fire in Ryan is because of Rai again, guessing that the quiet genius might be pushing the noble boy without anyone noticing. Ryan's eyes burn bright, all doubt gone as he locks his mind on the fight ahead. The instructor smirks to himself, thinking that Rai probably picked up some new trick again and even managed to unlock schema, making Ryan's sudden effort feel like a late start. Down on the empty arena floor, Ryan yells that the instructor should not hold back and warns him not to complain if someone does not make it out. He roars for the old man to bring everything he has, ready to stake his life on this training. In this world, schema is like a second invisible body, a full diagram of every part of a person. Mages shape power through their spirit zone, while swordsmen reach the same level by building up their schema. Every human carries a rough image of their own body, but schema pushes that image to the limit. Someone who masters it can move and use every single cell on purpose, turning their whole body into a weapon they control perfectly. Clutching the thick book to his chest, Cheyenne gulps and thinks about how schema works, realizing it is the total opposite of the spirit zone he knows. He steels himself to try it anyway, telling himself he first has to feel every part of his own body. Cheyenne sinks into himself, picturing a glowing body floating in the blue space and noting that so far, schema feels just like working with his spirit zone. The difference, he reminds himself, is that spirit zone makes him fade away, while schema forces him to dig deeper into his own being, peeling back a dark veil to finish the first step. Cheyenne lowers his hands and thinks that pouring everything into schema, which clashes with spirit zone, would be a waste right now. He wonders if the girl he met 3 years ago was using schema back then, stunned that someone that young could reach such a crazy level. With the book stacked beside him, Cheyenne grips the practice sword and decides it makes more sense to learn real sword moves while using spirit zone as his base. He plans to start simple, drilling the 8 basic directions of slashing until they become part of his body. Cheyenne lets out a sharp shout, forcing his breath and strength to move as one with the coming strike. Cheyenne lifts the sword high and brings it straight down on the wooden post, calling out the first move as an overhead strike. The blow lands with such force that the instructor shouts for him to stop, alarmed by how far the boy is pushing himself. The instructor cries out that Ryan's muscles will give out if he keeps striking like that, fear written all over his face. Ryan only slams his wrapped arms into the post again and snaps back that nothing has torn yet, refusing to slow down. Ryan grits his teeth and hammers the post again, swearing because his muscles still will not tear and his arms refuse to break the way he expected. The instructor can only stare up at him, shaken by how far the boy is willing to go just to grow stronger. With sweat and tears mixing on his face, Ryan smashes his arms into the post yet again and cries out that he still cannot grasp schema. He keeps striking anyway, as if he can beat the answer out of his own body. The instructor clamps down on the pole and tells Ryan they are done for today, cutting off his wild swings before he hurts himself for real. Ryan lets the pole slip from his hands, and it hits the ground as the tension in the yard starts to fade. Later, as the instructor presses ice to his swollen shoulder, Ryan sits there soaked in sweat and admits that his arms feel like they are on fire. The instructor sits next to him under the orange sky and reminds Ryan that, in every report so far, he has never been able to call him gifted. Ryan clenches his jaw and says that is exactly why he is grinding himself down like this, because the only way to change those reports is to work harder than anyone else. The instructor tells him he actually did great today and asks what part he is proud of, but Ryan just stares ahead and admits he only ever keeps track of his mistakes, not his wins. Ryan jerks his head around, shouting that he already knows he is no genius and demanding to know if his teacher is just making fun of him now. The instructor goes on, saying that true geniuses know exactly what they did right and pour in effort with full confidence. While far away, Cheyenne kneels over his notes and sword, pushing himself in a way that would shake even those so-called prodigies. Out in the quiet yard, the young swordsman stands alone, gripping his blade and thinking about how every swing is really built to decide whether someone lives or not. He knows that behind each move, there is a mind game, a battle of nerves that decides who walks away. He pictures an enemy in front of him, coming in with every trick possible, then strips it all down to just 8 paths a strike can follow. With that in mind, he spends a whole month drilling slashes along those 8 lines until his body can do them without thinking. He matches those cuts with guards from the same 8 paths, drilling blocks until his arms burn. For now, he cares about only these 2 things, attacking and blocking from every angle that matters. He snaps his practice blade up and meets the incoming force cleanly, feeling how 1 sharp strike and 1 firm block can form a full trade. With that pattern locked into his muscles, he is already planning what to stack on top of it. His body starts to move on its own, trading blows with one phantom after another as arcs of light whip around him. Those 8 simple moves twist together into a wild storm, yet every cut and guard still lands exactly where he wants. As another bright slash tears past, his eye widens, suddenly aware of how close each line of light comes to ending someone for real. That sharp awareness sends a chill through him, but it also makes his focus even tighter. Soon he is standing at the heart of a spinning vortex of cuts, each trail a path that could decide everything, and he cannot help but let out a breathless laugh. This is the road swordsmen pick for themselves, and he feels strangely glad to be on it. Later, under the star-filled sky, he tilts his head back and thinks about how the world of the sword stretches out without end, just like magic does. Knowing that there is no ceiling, only higher levels to reach, fills him with a steady burning excitement. Out in the dark yard, the young swordsman grips his wooden blade and quietly tells his parents he might not come back from what he is about to do. As he looks up at the wide night sky, he feels no regret at all, only thanks for the strange and amazing world he has gotten to touch. The arena below glows like a giant eye, waiting to see if he walks out of it or not. Inside the arena, Ryan raises his practice sword and tells the quiet swordsman that it is time to start. The torches spit fire around them, throwing long shadows as both of them face each other in the sand. As the blades come free, Ryan feels a strange pressure in the air and sees a faint glow gather along the metal. He stares, stunned that in just 1 month his opponent can give off an aura like that. Across from him, the blonde swordsman plants his feet and raises his wooden blade, a sharp wind curling around his legs as if the ground itself is answering his stance. That calm, steady posture makes it clear the aura Ryan felt is no mistake. Ryan's mind races back to when the blonde boy first grabbed a sword, begging the adults to believe he had never trained before, even though every swing hinted at something hidden. The old instructor had called his form sloppy, yet still wondered where that strange sense for the blade came from and how he could stay so calm while holding real steel. Standing here now, Ryan cannot shake the thought that this kid might carry the same kind of talent as Ra. And that idea lights a fire in his chest. Ryan's jaw tightens as his thoughts snap into a single line. If this boy really stands on the same level as Rai, then Ryan decides he has to overcome him, no matter what it takes. Ryan drives his heel into the ground and blasts forward, sand exploding under his step. He tears across the arena like a bolt, swinging his practice sword up as the blonde swordsman braces to meet him. Watching the way the blonde swordsman moves, someone can only marvel at how sharp and natural his sword work already is. The blonde swordsman stares ahead, eyes wide as he finally admits to himself that his opponent stands on a level he cannot even reach yet. Even so, he locks onto the glowing arc cutting toward him, feeling every twist of its path as if the strike itself is drawing him a map. He plants his feet and raises his wooden blade, letting the roaring strike pass close as he calmly traces its route with his eyes. Ryan sees that the blonde kid is not even looking at him, only at the moving blade, and rage spikes as he feels like his attack is being taken apart piece by piece. Watching that cold, steady stance, Ryan wonders if the kid feels any fear at all, while he himself knows he still cannot push past the thought that this match could be his last. His thoughts spin as he realizes that what truly scares him is not the hit itself, but the future he keeps picturing afterward. A future that still does not even exist. He thinks that without picturing what comes next, any person could walk off a cliff. And what chills him now is that the blonde swordsman seems to stand in that empty place on purpose, far past normal resolve. Down in the glowing pit of light, the blonde swordsman stands like a statue. And Ryan can only think that this kid has walled off every last feeling just to walk straight into danger. Ryan's thoughts twist for a moment, then he snaps back, ready to answer that cold resolve with his own. He tells himself he does not fear death either, then hurls his whole body forward, swinging with everything he has. The blonde swordsman lifts his blade high, ready to bring it crashing down into that reckless charge. Their wooden blades smash together in a burst of blue light, the force ripping through the floorboards. The blonde kid lets out a pained grunt as the impact drives through his arms. Ryan's eye burns as he thinks that no matter how hard someone fights, effort alone cannot always change where they end up. He drives in anyway, thinking that every fighter hits a wall they cannot slip past with tricks, only smash through with real skill. Ryan rains down blow after blow, each swing tearing the air while the blonde kid scrambles to block. The younger swordsman realizes with a jolt that Ryan's blade hits like a hammer, yet moves faster than he expected. Inside his mental field, the blonde kid watches Ryan's shape blur and split, the lines of attack twisting in ways he cannot track. He feels his synesthesia slipping, the clear paths he relied on turning into a storm of noise. Sensing the opening, Ryan throws his weight into another wild swing, teeth bared as he forces the pace higher. He is done testing and now aims to smash straight through the blonde kid's guard. The blonde swordsman staggers, staring down at the fresh slash across his chest, hands locked tight around his sword. For a second, he looks more stunned than hurt, as if he cannot believe Ryan forced a clean hit through his guard. His vision flares bright blue as his synesthesia spikes, and panic crashes over him. He curses inside, knowing Ryan's next swing could be the one that ends this match for real. Ryan sees the blade screaming down at him, and for a heartbeat, is sure this strike could actually finish him. He throws his arms up with a raw shout, pouring everything into stopping that cut. Ryan twists his body and unleashes a wild horizontal slash that tears through the air like a wave. The blonde swordsman barely throws himself low and sideways, skidding across the floor as the strike rips past where his head just was. The blonde swordsman sprints along the torn floor, the tail of Ryan's slash chasing him and carving a glowing line in the dust. Each step feels like he is running away from a falling wall rather than a simple wooden sword. Catching his breath, the blonde swordsman mutters to himself that something is off. By his count, there should only be 8 clear lines an attack can follow. Yet Ryan's next swing crashes in from a strange angle again, forcing him to brace as that blue arc slams into his guard. Ryan watches the blonde kid's lost expression and grins, almost pleased that his opponent finally feels the gap. He explains that this is ogent swordsmanship, a style meant for training with a massive blade, and tells him there is no way a normal guard can stand up to it. The blonde swordsman clutches his aching chest, lungs burning as he struggles to steady his stance. Ryan drives it in further, saying that every single strike he throws carries enough force to crush bone, and the kid can feel that claim in every throb of his ribs. Ryan roars that he will crush his opponent with pure strength and hurls himself forward, every muscle straining for a decisive blow. His wooden blade carves a roaring wave of blue light that smashes toward the blonde swordsman, kicking up shards of stone as it bears down on him. The blonde swordsman watches the energy trail fade and realizes that if Ryan had turned that chest strike upward, his side would have been done for. So he wonders why Ryan keeps using only huge, simple swings. Studying Ryan's posture, The blonde swordsman decides Ryan understands the sword less than he first thought, guessing that while Ryan is great at using skills, he still lacks the insight to bend them in clever ways. With that judgment made, the blonde swordsman coolly lowers the level he had set for Ryan in his mind, treating him as less dangerous than before. Their wooden swords slam together in midair, sparks of light bursting out as neither of them gives an inch. The blonde swordsman narrows his glowing eyes, scraps his old plan on the spot, and whips his sword around, ready to press the attack himself. He commits fully and surges in with a blazing strike, his blade smashing into Ryan's guard in a burst of blue light as he takes the fight to him at last. Ryan's eyes bulge as the counterattack slams into his guard, his mind racing to understand how someone that drained can still hit this hard. Ryan drives in with another fierce swing, shocked that he is still moving when his body feels empty, yet trusting this one push to turn the fight around. Ryan braces under another plain downward cut, baffled that these basic swings feel heavier and sharper each time instead of slowing down. The next strike slips past his guard and crashes into his ribs, forcing the proud brawler to grit his teeth as the shock steals his breath. Ryan can tell Rai's body is close to its limit, yet he forces himself to breathe steady, knowing that if he rushes now and burns out, this chance will slip away. Rai's mind flashes back to the mansion courtyard, where grinning nobles once clapped him on the back and promised grand parties just because he broke a few training dummies. Nearby, a dark-haired girl starts to move toward the shaken boy, only for an adult hand to clamp down on her shoulder, holding her in place. Her eyes gleam and a crooked smile curls across her lips, as if the praise showered on Rai and the pressure crushing him are exactly what she wanted to see. Rai roars, veins standing out on his neck, refusing to be treated like some joke or weakling. The blue-haired brawler hurls himself forward, yelling that he'll rise to be the greatest swordsman alive, and brings his sword down with all the strength he has left. The blonde swordsman scrambles to meet it, eyes wide as their blades smash together hard enough to shake the air. Rai raises his sword overhead again, muscles screaming as he throws out another brutal swing, caring only about smashing through. His opponent watches in shock, wondering if Rai has already given up on winning clean and is just betting everything on raw force without thinking. The blonde swordsman narrows his glowing eyes, sweat sliding down his cheek as he starts to sense that Rai's wild swings are turning into something he can't read anymore. Inside the blonde fighter's sharpened senses, Rai's body turns into a dark blur wrapped in flaring wings of light, his blade carving so many lines at once that the path simply disappears, turning every next strike into a guess. Rai shoots in low, dragging his sword behind him, his whole body leaning into a charge that aims to hit before the blonde swordsman can even guess where the blade will come from. The blonde swordsman whips his blade around, blue power flaring as he tries to cut through the rush. But as he swings, his eye widens, a cold drop of sweat sliding down as Rai's position keeps slipping out of his grasp. The blue-haired swordsman roared and hurled himself in, dragging his blade up from the floor in a wild, rising swing that carried every last bit of strength he had. The blonde swordsman lifted his glowing blade and sent a blinding arc of power forward, trying to cut straight through the charge. But as the light burst out, his eye widened, a sharp fear creeping in that he still might be too late. Their strikes met in a single brutal flash, red force tearing across the dark like the whole arena had been ripped open. The blonde swordsman lurched back, breath catching in his throat as he looked down at his chest, where the fabric was torn and dark with blood. Even with his chest burning, the blonde swordsman raised his weapon and met the blue-haired fighter's next blazing charge, their blades racing toward each other for what felt like the final exchange. The blonde swordsman somehow stayed on his feet, chest heaving as fresh blood spread across his shirt, and each breath felt heavier than the last. His bright blue eyes shook as it finally hit him that the match was over, and he was the one who had lost. The blue-haired swordsman stared back in silence, sweat sliding down his cheek, as the weight of it sank in that he had just beaten a noble and had no idea how that would come back on him. The blue-haired swordsman grabbed his head and yelled, furious at himself for messing up and feeling like he had lost yet again, even with the noble standing hurt in front of him. Catching his breath, the blue-haired fighter calmed down and told the blonde noble that the win was his, and that after losing like this, he had no right to complain no matter how the noble chose to treat him. The blonde noble stared at him, stunned that this rough swordsman was ready to throw his life away so easily, and he breathed out the man's name without even thinking. A shaky smile tugged at the noble's lips as he asked if the swordsman was seriously talking about letting himself be killed over a duel like this. The blue-haired swordsman flailed in panic, snapping that if he ever laid a hand on a young master like that, his own life would be over long before anyone called it justice. He let out a crooked grin and said that while the noble might have stepped in ready to die, he himself had swung his sword only because he wanted to stay alive. The swordsman exploded, calling the whole duel nonsense and accusing the noble of dumping the blame for his own lazy training on a servant, while the noble shouted back that someone in his position should have shown proper loyalty instead of talking back. The blonde noble threw his head back and roared that talk of loyalty was complete nonsense, and down below the blue-haired swordsman shrank into a tiny, furious version of himself, yelling right back at the insult. The blue-haired swordsman froze, sweat running down his face as he thought about how insane it was to force a simple butler into a life-or-death match just to look loyal and cool in front of a sword instructor. In the noble's mind, the blue-haired fighter was just a loudmouth pointing and whining, but in the swordsman's own memory he had stood there like a cold reaper, promising to wipe the noble out without a trace. The blonde noble landed hard and yelped that he had nearly lost his life for real, while the blue-haired swordsman just stood there in silence, letting the dust settle around them. The fighter stared back at the noble, wondering why this felt so awkward and thinking that people were supposed to trade praise after a match, not threats and panic. The blonde noble wiped the blood from his lip, puzzled over how the icy warrior he had just faced could now look so normal, and his mind flashed to Rai, the long-haired tormentor who always looked down on him with a twisted smile. The noble blinked as it hit him that, unlike Rai, this rough swordsman had never laughed at his weakness, and had instead met him head-on with everything he had. The blue-haired fighter finally broke the silence and asked the blonde noble for his name. And after a brief stumble, the noble straightened up and introduced himself as Cheyenne. The swordsman gave a small, tired smile and answered in turn, telling Cheyenne that his own name was Ogent Ryan. Ryan suddenly reached out his hand and suggested they treat each other as friends, and Cheyenne just stared up at him, stunned that the cold warrior from moments ago was now smiling like that. Time moved on, and the huge Ogent Great Library stood bright under the autumn sky, busy with workers hauling in stacks of books. Inside, the stern library master listened, as the staff reported that over 7,000 of the 10,000 books had already been sorted and put in order. Rai studied the shelves with a pleased look and told Ryan that he had done well in a single year, and Ryan stood there in his neat suit, quietly proud of how far he had come since taking this job. As Ryan walked the red carpet between the shelves, he felt each finished cart make the next one faster, like the whole place ran smoother with every book they cleared. The history section, Ryan counted that only 200 of the 850 volumes were still unread. And with how easily he could finish several books a day, the base of knowledge he had dreamed about was finally within reach. Ryan remembered the day he had pushed himself to the edge in that sword match, sure he would not survive, and how that terror had toughened his spirit until he could hold his zone far longer than before. So now, as he slid another book into place, he felt certain that even a rough start could be beaten if he just kept moving forward. Later, Ryan flipped through a thick volume and joked about whether Cheyenne's noble family had really read all these. But in his heart, he knew that no pay or privilege in this place could match the simple gain of having a true friend by his side. Ryan stretched from the ladder and mentioned that Cheyenne's family head and the young master were regulars here, like this huge library was just their study room. Cheyenne stared up with his mouth open, holding the book tight, thinking how nice it must be to be born that smart. Cheyenne leaned back against the shelf, lazily flipping the thick book into the air and laughing about how many books he still had to read. Watching him mess around like that, it really did feel like he was the perfect spoiled youngest son. Ryan hurried over with a stiff smile, clutching the book like a treasure and begging Cheyenne to be careful, saying he would be finished if anything happened to it. Cheyenne froze at the sudden pressure, a drop of sweat sliding down his cheek. Cheyenne shot him a finger gun and flashed a wide grin, swearing that no book could ever matter more than Ryan. He even bragged that, even if the whole library went up in flames, he would make sure Ryan walked out fine. Ryan rubbed his forehead with a tired smile, feeling like he could never really hate Cheyenne as long as the guy kept talking like that. He figured he would be safe as long as this walking disaster stayed put, but he still wondered why Cheyenne had shown up again today instead of focusing on his training. Cheyenne lay back on a stack of books like it was a couch and said he had already finished his basic drills, so he came here to study instead. Ryan looked down at him shaking, asking what kind of studying this was when Cheyenne had not even opened a page. Cheyenne suddenly kicked his legs and waved his fists, bouncing on the piles of books as he yelled about how bored he was. Ryan just stood there under him, sweat running down his neck, wondering how he was supposed to handle this overgrown child. In truth, Ryan had not grown lazy at all. He was still trying to keep the library running right. It was just hard to look serious when he spent half his day cleaning up after Cheyenne's boredom. Ryan might look calm now, but he is more like a wildfire, hard to stop when something sets him off. All it takes is the right spark, and that buried heat inside him roars back to life. Back in the quiet library, Ryan finally snapped and told Cheyenne that if he came here to study, then he should really start reading. Cheyenne slumped over his book, already looking tired of the idea. Ryan asked why someone aiming to be a mage needed to plow through so many books. Cheyenne admitted he had barely studied before coming here, so now he had to make up for lost time, no matter how crazy the number sounded. Cheyenne said it like it was nothing, that after chewing through around 600 history books, most of the past finally made sense to him. Ryan stared at him, stunned that anyone could read that much and still call it being behind. Once he started, Cheyenne's hands moved on their own, flipping page after page as if the words were pulling him in. Every new line seemed to light him up, like the whole world had just opened in front of him. Cheyenne's eyes did not leave the page, his focus so sharp it was almost scary. Watching him, Ryan wondered how anyone could read that fast and felt a little small, thinking that even though they were the same age, Cheyenne already felt far ahead of him. Cheyenne snapped out of it, coughed into his hand, and hurried to fix his posture like he had been focused the whole time. He lifted the red book higher, pretending to find it very deep and important. Across from him, Ryan slowly opened his own book, and the first line hit him with a bold question about who would win if a swordsman and a mage faced each other. That simple thought pulled his mind away from chores and straight into the kind of future they were both chasing. The writer talked about roaming the world just to answer that one question, and Ryan pictured a lonely peak stabbing into the sky. In his mind, he stood in the Ardusna Mountains 6,000 meters up where even the air felt thin. Down in the dark forest, strange trees waited like hunters, said to swallow birds whole. Ryan was still lost in that wild place when Cheyenne suddenly broke in, calling the book painfully dull. The would-be mage grinned like he had just told a joke, while the young butler jerked back, stunned that anyone could say that after a start like this. Ryan snapped that there were no drawings and not a single line about sword skills, so how was this fun? Cheyenne shot back that Ryan had not even finished one page and still wanted to judge it. In the end, the butler leaned in anyway, pressing him for the only thing that mattered to him, who actually wins. Cheyenne frowned and asked why those two would even cross blades in the first place. To him, the reason for the fight mattered more than some simple win or loss. Before either boy could answer, a tall man with long black hair stepped out of the doorway and calmly stated that the swordsman would come out on top. Both Ryan and Cheyenne froze, realizing someone important had been listening the whole time. Ryan bent almost in half, greeting the visitor as a young master of the house, his voice tight with worry. As he straightened, he hissed at Cheyenne, shocked that his friend seemed to know this person so well. The newcomer reached out and shut the red book with a soft thud, as if drawing a line under their childish argument. Ryan kept his head low, a drop of sweat sliding down as he wondered if the young master had caught every stupid word. Across from him, Cheyenne's eye twitched the same way, sharing the same silent question. The young master stared down at the red book, thinking how a simple chat between a noble and a butler could blow up into real trouble. The blue-haired swordsman forced a grin and joked that the young master was only backing the swordsman because he was one himself. The young master brushed off the doubt and said there was no need for guesswork, since the answer was clear just from where the swordsman and mage stood on the field. The swordsman narrowed his eyes and grinned wider, scoffing that they were talking about a fight, not some badge of rank, and hinting that the noble was about to spout nonsense. The young master tilted his head and asked if the swordsman was just going to ignore him, and the boy's shoulders stiffened in angry disbelief. Blonde butler froze as the question landed on him, sweat running down his face as he realized they actually wanted his opinion. The butler stayed standing, wondering if there was some hidden intent behind the young master's question, since he had always found that man impossible to read. The young master's golden eyes stayed cold and steady, giving nothing away about what answer he wanted to hear. The butler swallowed hard as he thought it through, knowing that once a swordsman stepped into a mage spirit zone, the fight usually turned against the blade. Trying to sound sure, the butler adds that if the swordsman rushed in fast enough to strike before any spell was cast, the mage would be in trouble. But the words already feel wrong in his mouth. The young master smiles and calmly finishes the thought for him, saying that in that case the mage is the one who loses. The butler stiffens as it hits him that he has just argued for the swordsman's win, not the mage he was supposed to favor. The blue-haired swordsman grits his teeth, realizing the young master had dragged the butler into proving the swordsman's point for him. Memories paint him as a boy who, whenever he saw something he disliked, went after whatever the other person treasured most. And now that same man stands here smiling, saying he always did enjoy history. The butler and the swordsman sit frozen over their books, as the young master casually mentions a famed armor said to twist a mage spirit zone and shut their power down. In the mage's own spirit zone, their power filled everything from the water to the air. Surrounded by that glow, spellcasters moved like they owned the place, while the older man finally understood how unfair that field really was. He pictured a lone fighter in deep water, with sharks gliding around and waiting to strike. That was what stepping into a mage spirit zone felt like for anyone who relied on a blade. Then he brought up anti-magic, gear that stepped right into that glowing field and scrambled it like stirred water, cutting off the shark's senses. With that kind of armor, the mage's perfect hunting ground suddenly was not so safe anymore. Wrapped head to toe in that armor, a swordsman could walk through spells like they were nothing, turning every mage attack into dead air. Still, the young master warned that, past a point, all of this was only written on paper, not proven on a real field. He explained that anti-magic itself moved like waves, and that nature refused to be pushed any further, no matter how much gold was poured into it. Even Yakra, the genius of wave magic, had only managed to raise the famed 5 generals' armor to about 2/3 power. Back at the desk, the young master calmly added that a single piece of that armor cost about as much as the whole kingdom ran on for a year. The blue-haired swordsman gaped at the number and blurted out the thought in his head, asking if that meant a well-trained blade was actually the better deal. Ryan's smile sharpened as he pointed out the real punchline. The one who first forged anti-magic was not some knight, but a mage. The idea of a caster selling a weapon that shut down their own kind hung in the air between them. The swordsman snapped back, stunned that any mage would hand out their own weakness, while the butler just stared, unsure what to say. Ryan brushed it off as simple business, saying there were plenty of places that needed magic shut down, and that selling anti-magic there was the easiest way for a clever mage to stack up a mountain of money. Ryan smiled in that smug way of his, saying there were already plenty of mages lining up to be used, so smart people did not even need to chase after ancient relics anymore. The blue-haired swordsman shot to his feet, shouting that calling all mages pathetic for selling their own weak points was way over the line. The young master only smiled brighter and said that kind of selfish deal-making was exactly what being a mage meant. The swordsman stared at him, still hung up on the fact that anti-magic itself had been invented by a mage, like he could not wrap his head around why they would do that. The picture shifts to a grand hall where a ruler sits on a high throne, using anti-magic to keep spellcasters in check wherever magic is banned. In a training arena, young students practice while a glowing ring strips away their spells, forcing them to learn control. Because of this, anti-magic is not only a burden for mages, but also a tool the whole world uses to keep power in balance and squeeze benefits from magic itself. The young master's smile thinned, and he admitted with a stiff little laugh that, when anti-magic helped so many people, it was hard to say swordsmen were somehow better than mages because of it. The swordsman fell silent, covering his mouth as he chewed on that answer, while Ryan's jaw tightened, already bracing himself for the next stubborn claim. Ryan suddenly lunged forward, and yelled that ideals and reality were two different things, And no matter how useful anti-magic became, it still would not change his belief that a mage could never win against a swordsman. Young master sagged over the desk with a shaky laugh, while the blue-haired swordsman grinned wide, sweat still on his cheek from the stress. Ryan forced a crooked smile and admitted he honestly thought he was done for back there. The swordsman wrapped Ryan in a rough hug, laughing as he bragged that Ryan's sharp tongue was like a blade, and that he was sure this guy would become the greatest swordsman in the world. Feeling strangely light, Shiren thought back to Ryan's claim and admitted he still was not sure where ideals ended and reality began, but one thing was clear to him now. That harsh, fearless drive to turn even your own weak points into experiments might be cold, yet it existed for everyone's sake. Snow clung to the stone crest on the wall, and 6 quiet months slipped by as winter settled over the estate. An elderly steward watched calmly as a hand filled out the library transfer categorization status report, marking the end of months of quiet work. He set a cup of hot tea beside the stack of papers, letting the steam rise while the ink dried on the report. Across the mansion, the family head sat behind his desk with a teacup in hand, calmly remarking that the whole library transfer had wrapped up far sooner than he had expected. The associate butler stood before the family head and reported that moving the library ahead by 6 months had been brutal, since they had to sort books left alone for 20 years. He admitted that the boy who helped them was so useful that it felt wasteful to let him go, and he even floated the idea of stretching the contract with some excuse. The family head frowned over his teacup and told the butler to drop that kind of talk and get back to work. Chastened, the associate butler backed off and apologized for overstepping. Left alone, the family head took another slow sip of tea, mulling over the boy who had worked so hard for his house. The name Shiren Aryan rose in his thoughts, standing out now as more than just another hired hand. At a sunlit desk, Shiren turned another heavy page, buried in yet one more long volume from the mountain of books he had to process. Shiren finally shut the book and rested his hands on the cover, thinking that reading one story was simple, but pushing through stacks of thick volumes like this was on a whole different level. He pressed a hand to his chest and smiled softly, feeling like he was standing inside a dream now that this chance had finally opened up for him. The door flew open and Ryan leaned in, eyes bright as he yelled for Shiren, asking if he was done with everything and still around. Ryan froze, staring like he had misheard, because the idea that Shiren had really finished all that work sounded insane. Shiren just smiled in that soft way of his and said he had gone through everything here, like it was no big deal. Ryan burst out laughing and yanked Shiren into a tight hug, shouting that he really pulled it off and calling him amazing until Shiren could barely breathe. Ryan kept grinning, saying how incredible this was and congratulating him again, while Shiren, still a little shy, mentioned there was one thing he wanted before he headed out. Shiren asked if he could come over to Ryan's house, and Ryan jerked back, eyes wide, blurting out if Shiren was actually serious. Shiren sounded a bit confused, wondering why a simple visit to a friend's house was something to freak out over. Ryan admitted he had gone out of his way to hide that they were close, and that it had bothered him more than he let on. Then he looked at Shiren with watery eyes and asked if this invite was for real. Shiren scratched his cheek with a shy smile and confessed that only meeting here had felt a bit sad to him too. So he really did want to see the world Ryan came from. Ryan burst through the front hall, the servants bowing and greeting their young master as he rushed past. A moment later he cracked a side door open, and one of the staff quietly wished him luck as he slipped out. Ryan lit up, giving a huge thumbs up as he agreed to take Shiren home with him. He added that they had lived like this for a year already, and that his whole family happened to be out right now, which made it the perfect time. Shiren stood there in the cold, breath fogging in the air, staring wide-eyed as he tried to process that they were really heading to Ryan's house right away. As they reached the Grand District, Shiren looked around at the snow and lights, slowly realizing he had really stepped into the world Ryan came from. The mansion rose over them like a fortress, flags snapping above the blue roof as they crossed the empty yard. Shiren, eyeing the front entrance, nervously asked if they were really allowed to just walk in like this, and Ryan laughed it off, saying the family would only be back in the evening. Inside, the hall was so wide and quiet that Shiren's footsteps felt too loud, and he could not help whispering how huge the place was. Ryan strolled ahead like it was nothing, saying that only the servants were around today. From above, the two of them looked small as they crossed the sunlit floor toward a towering door. Shiren stared up at it, thinking that a single room here might be bigger than his entire house, and the thought sent a nervous chill through him. Stopping before the huge door, Shiren finally accepted that Ryan really was the young master of a wealthy family, even though the guy beside him still felt like the same loud friend from school. Ryan pushed the door open with a grin, proudly showing off that this was his own room. Ryan watched his friend's reaction, a little nervous and a little proud, as if waiting to see what Shiren would think of the room he was about to show. Ryan's room turned out to be the smallest one at the end of the hall, packed with wooden swords and gear like a private training lodge. Shiren joked that it looked more like a practice room than a bedroom, while the young master proudly welcomed him. Broken chairs, scattered practice swords, and torn cloth covered the floor, making it hard to believe this was a noble's bedroom. Ryan actually lived in a place like that, as if training mattered more than any fancy furniture. Sunlight poured through the window onto a simple desk and a single closed book, hinting that beneath all the chaos, this room also held a quiet place where Ryan could breathe and think. After a while, Shiren was already drenched in sweat, staring at the stacked crates and training tools as if Ryan's idea of fun might actually wear him out completely. Ryan, now dressed in a sharp suit, hummed to himself with a smug little smile, as if all of this was just light fun while his guest did his best to keep up. Shiren grit his teeth, sweat running down his face, refusing to back down even though it felt like Ryan was beating him at everything in this place. At the card table, Cheyenne finally threw his arms up and gave in, shouting that he quit after losing yet again. Ryan laughed as he pulled the chips toward himself, already asking if they should go for another round. Cheyenne leaned forward, sweating and fired up, accusing Ryan of using that spirit zone trick to cheat him, while Ryan snapped back, offended that his friend thought he would scam him. Ryan just smiled and broke down all of Cheyenne's bad habits, from how he placed his ace to how his betting speed changed, leaving Cheyenne frozen as he realized how easy he had been to read. Ryan tapped his lips and said that when he really locked in on something, watching every little move and the overall flow together always paid off, because that was how you could guess what someone planned to do next. Cheyenne pressed a hand to his forehead, quietly turning Ryan's words over and trying to picture what it meant to stop clinging to tiny hints and see the whole thing at once. Ryan laughed and said that kind of thinking might click if Cheyenne used a schema, since his own spirit zone always made that wider view easier, while Cheyenne sat there with his brain feeling like it was about to overheat. Cheyenne watched Ryan stroll toward the window, his own head still buzzing, and admitted to himself that even if he only half got it, trying to piece this new way of thinking together was weirdly fun. Ryan picked up a green book, a bit surprised when Cheyenne eagerly asked to borrow it, admitting he had spent so long on history texts that he had not touched a simple story in ages. By the time Ryan turned back, Cheyenne was sprawled over the card table with steam drifting off him, chips and cards scattered around like proof of how badly the night had beaten him. Ryan checked his pocket watch and remembered his family was supposed to come back in the evening, wondering if they had arrived already. Soft melody drifted through the hall, and Ryan stopped mid-step as he realized he was hearing a piano. He followed the sound to the music room, where his older sister, the court pianist, was the only one in the whole estate who could play with that kind of grace. The pianist turned with an easy smile, lightly asking how her performance had sounded to him. Ryan froze in the doorway, mind racing as he realized she knew he had been secretly listening to her piano sonata. Ryan hurriedly praised the piece as amazing, even while his thoughts spun in panic over how to handle this sudden meeting. The pianist studied the blonde boy and said she had never seen him before, asking if he was new, and Ryan quickly explained that he had been trusted with organizing the estate's books for the past year. Ryan's sister smiled, saying not just anyone could handle the library work and calling him quite smart, then asked if he had ever played the piano himself, which made him tense up again, knowing he had to stay on guard around her. Ryan stared at her, mind racing as he remembered how she used complex patterns to play and how he had heard she was the most terrifying person in the whole estate. There was no way this could be as simple as it sounded. The court pianist just smiled and told him to relax, saying that since she had allowed it, no one in the estate would dare blame him. Ryan swallowed hard, thinking that with her speaking so gently, there was no way he could turn her down now. He sat beside her, telling himself that chances to touch a grand piano like this might never come again, while the court pianist cheerfully pointed out each key and mark on the score, naming them one by one. She placed her fingers on the keyboard and told him to press those 3 keys together, showing him how a simple chord was formed. As the notes rang out, Ryan's eyes widened a little and he admitted to himself that it actually sounded great. The court pianist praised the sound, and Ryan, still nervous but excited, asked if he could try playing the piece himself, which she gladly allowed. Ryan bent over the keys and admitted it might sound rough, but the court pianist just smiled and told him that was normal for a first time, even as someone watching wondered how far he could go after learning only a few chords today. Ryan raised both hands over the keyboard, fingers shaking just a little as he got ready to play his first real song. Ryan leans over the keys, hands spread wide as he plays, sweat running down his cheek while he forces himself not to slow down. The court pianist watches with wide eyes, thinking that every note he presses is off and wondering how he can mess it up this badly. Ryan keeps his fingers moving without a hint of doubt, while his sister hovers at his side, torn over whether she should cut him off before he embarrasses himself. The court pianist studies him more closely, feeling that while his fingering is completely off, there is something strangely familiar in the flow of the music. Standing shoulder to shoulder at the piano, Ryan and his sister stare at the keys, stunned by how his awkward hands somehow bring out a tune that feels exactly like the one she played before. In her mind, she admits that even with all those mistakes, it feels like he is replaying the very same piece she just performed. Ryan's eye lights up with a blue glow, and the grand piano around them turns into a shining web of lines and notes, as if his mind has locked onto every sound and shape of the song at once. His fingers glide over the shining keys, following the floating notes as if the whole song is laid out in front of him, and each touch makes the light and sound blend together even more smoothly. The court pianist stiffens, hearing that the messy notes are lining up with the song she played. Ryan's fingers keep moving, and each touch lands closer to the real sound. From above, the two of them lean over the keys as a strong, bright sound floods the room, rough but strangely in sync. The court pianist stares, stunned, thinking that while this mess can't even be called a real performance, it somehow hits the very core of how the piece should feel. The court pianist can't understand why someone who plays like that is working as a butler, even thinking he looks oddly refined for the job. Cheyenne freezes under her gaze and hurriedly starts to apologize, not sure what he did wrong. Ryan stomps into the room, shirt half open, shouting that it is way too noisy and that his sister should come home, wash up, and sleep instead of going wild on the piano. Ryan blinks when he spots Cheyenne beside his sister and demands to know why the butler is here at this hour. Cheyenne breaks into a nervous sweat and rushes to explain himself before things get the wrong idea. Ryan eyes the two of them and asks if they already know each other. Cheyenne snaps back with a rushed denial, making the whole thing look even more suspicious. Cheyenne forces a shaky smile as he backs away, thinking that if this keeps up, everyone will find out about his close ties with Ryan and it almost feels like he is sneaking around. Behind him, Ryan calls his name, while Cheyenne just wants to slip out of the mess. Ryan stiffens, blurting out that Cheyenne is his friend, no matter what anyone thinks. Ryan's sister waves off his concern, saying the strict elder in the house might be harsh, but does not care about things like a noble being friends with a butler. Cheyenne stares up at her, stunned as Ryan argues that of course a noble elder would care, especially when the butler's name is Cheyenne. Ryan's sister gently rests a hand on Cheyenne's shoulder and tells him that if Ryan calls him a friend, then that is what he is, adding that her brother may be a bit hopeless but he always means what he says. Curious now, Ryan's sister presses Cheyenne to tell her what he had in mind while playing, admitting she only just learned that the rough performance was his and not her brother fooling around. In Cheyenne's mind, the careful wall of common sense he had built over 16 years crumbles, because this noble woman truly does not care that he is a commoner who is close with her brother. Cheyenne turns to Ryan, saying that what matters more is why Ryan lied, because from where he is sitting, Ryan's sister seems gentle and kind, not scary at all. Ryan glares and tells Cheyenne not to be fooled, insisting that behind that sweet smile his sister is a witch who will swallow him whole if he lets his guard down. Ryan's sister laughs softly and admits her brother can be childish, but she says she is glad he has a friend like Cheyenne, while Ryan listens with a shy smile. The blue-haired youth smirks as he recalls Ryan's sister gushing over how cute Cheyenne is, and even joking that they should just keep the boy and treat him like family. With a playful smile, Ryan's sister asks if Ryan is really so close to Cheyenne that he would even trust him with her future. The blue-haired youth bursts out laughing and shouts that his sister is not the point at all, insisting that Cheyenne deserves someone far better than her. Stung by his words, Ryan's sister leaps on the blue-haired youth and sends them both crashing to the floor, while he yells that it hurts and Ryan watches, thinking nobles are impossible to understand. As they walk down the hall, Ryan's sister snaps that he should know why she is back, then calmly explains she came to take him to the official swordsman qualification exam tomorrow and that their grandfather will join them after meeting a friend, leaving the blue-haired youth frozen in shock. Later, Ryan faces the blue-haired youth with a tight look, whispering that the official swordsman qualification exam is already here and struggling to grasp how quickly everything has escalated. There was also the Alpia's Magic Academy, a royal-approved group where graduates were treated as unofficial 10th-class mages. From there, they could slowly climb higher by stacking achievement points through the Mage Association or the guilds. Still, everyone knew real money and fame gathered around the official title. So even with other papers and side paths, endless challengers kept lining up for that one brutal exam. Ryan had faced that insane test when he was only 18. Hearing that, Cheyenne could only think that true geniuses lived in a different world, backed by a mountain of family support. Ryan's sister ruffled his hair and told him not to brood over it. She said she had to get ready for dinner herself, since special seafood had come from the palace and she wanted to handle it personally. Before leaving, Ryan's sister turned to Cheyenne with a soft smile, saying she was glad to have met him and hoping they could greet each other properly the next time they crossed paths. Cheyenne answered her politely, but doubt flashed across his face. He wondered if there would really be a next time for someone like him. As they sat together at the shining piano, Cheyenne already knew he would be leaving the mansion the very next day, making this quiet moment feel strangely precious. Later in the hall, Cheyenne rushed up to Ryan and blurted out that something was wrong with his sister. The words wiped the calm from Ryan's face in an instant. Ryan glanced over with a stiff face and suddenly asked if Rihanna was seeing anyone. Cheyenne froze, eyes wide, like his brain had just stopped working. The young butler stretched his mouth into a shaky grin and hurriedly claimed he had only asked for fun, telling Ryan to forget it as he tried to steer the talk away. Then Cheyenne snapped, flailing back and bellowing that it was nothing, his voice echoing down the hall while Ryan chased after him in a panic. Ryan dashed after him, cursing himself for letting his feelings slip just because he was upset they might not see Cheyenne again, then shouted down the corridor to Rihanna that it was actually Cheyenne who wanted to know. Cornered, Cheyenne leaned over the railing and hollered Rihanna's name, demanding at the top of his lungs if she had someone special. Every maid in the hall stopped and stared, while Cheyenne grabbed his own face with a groan and Ryan hung off his back, both of them realizing how far this had gone. Down below, the maids traded worried whispers about hearing the word boyfriend, but Rihanna just laughed, waving it away and telling them the boys were only fooling around. Rihanna marched off with the maids, calmly telling them to treat the food now that the danger was gone, and they answered her with bright energy while the head butler watched from his hiding spot, already thinking about what this meant. The head butler called Hans over and asked if the third young master's friend had shown up that day, and Hans answered that as far as he knew, no visit had been planned at all. Up on the balcony, Ryan and Cheyenne were still worked up from their shouting match, completely unaware that their little outburst had just put Cheyenne squarely on the head butler's radar. The head butler muttered Cheyenne's name under his breath, then stiffened as he finally remembered where he had heard it before and why it bothered him so much. With his eyes suddenly blazing, the head butler ordered Timuranto to come to his room right away, already planning how to deal with the boy tied to that name. Far away in the frozen woods, heavy breaths echoed between the trees as someone forced their body to keep moving through the snow. Ryan planted his staff in the snow and gasped for air, sweat steaming off his skin as he begged for a few minutes to catch his breath. As Ryan grabbed his water bottle with a shaking hand, the grizzled instructor watched him closely, thinking that fire in the boy's eyes was back for the first time in a year and wondering how long it would last this time. The instructor watched Ryan and thought that if the boy really made it to the royal palace, his whole life would turn out different from here. Ryan turned at the shout of a servant calling him third young master, hearing that there was a serious problem with something they called schema. The butler ran up, gasping as he passed on Riane's order for Ryan to return to the mansion right away. But Ryan took another drink and said that if this was about Rai again, she could handle it without him. The butler yelled back that Ryan had it all wrong, and that this had nothing to do with Rai at all. When the butler blurted out that the contract butler Cheyenne was in real danger and might not make it, Ryan sprayed his water in shock. Ryan stepped closer and pressed for answers, and the worn-out butler stammered that Cheyenne was supposed to return home that day, but head butler Louis had already sent a report to the patriarch, and whatever was in it seemed to be connected to Ryan. Ryan yanked on his coat and said he had to see his father right away, admitting that the butler called Cheyenne was his friend and that his father must have learned about it. Ryan cried out that once he told his father everything, there was no way Cheyenne would be punished, but the instructor cut him off, warning that he could not just run off like this. Ryan froze as the instructor stepped in front of him, leaving him confused about why he was being stopped now of all times. The instructor gripped his sword and called Ryan and Cheyenne by name, his hard stare making it clear this was no simple warning. Far away at the family mansion, the great hall filled with nobles and servants as everyone gathered for a formal judgment that would decide Cheyenne's fate. The contract butler knelt alone on the cold floor while nobles and servants watched from both sides, the huge hall suddenly feeling like a court. His thoughts spun as he wondered how things had twisted this far. Around him, no one dared to speak up against the decision. On the servants' side, the maids huddled together, whispering that this was what happened when a commoner got too close to a noble. Their eyes were full of fear, but also a bit of cruel curiosity. None of them even thought about stepping in to help. The head butler watched with hard, tired eyes, thinking that even if the boy was clueless about the world, there had to be a limit. To him, this bond between master and servant had already gone too far. His silence made the judgment feel even more final. The ruling family sat stiffly on the blue sofa, the father gripping the report while the others stared ahead in grim silence. No one seemed willing to question the choice that had just put a boy's life on the line. The blue-haired lady suddenly leaned toward the family head, clutching her chest as she begged him to listen, saying she still had something important to say. The father barely turned his head, asking coldly what more there was to discuss when everything was already written. The father flipped through the thick stack of papers the head butler had given him, saying that everything he needed was already in this document. To him, those pages were proof strong enough to drown any protest. A group of employees stood below, sweating as the father explained that the report held countless statements about how cruelly that child had treated Ryan. Their own words now pinned the boy down, and none of them dared to meet his eyes. The contract butler bowed his head as the father reminded everyone that the boy had agreed to the contract and had no right to complain now. When asked if he had anything left to say, he drew a shaky breath and answered that there was still one more thing he wanted to ask. The contract butler lifted his head and, instead of begging, asked what would happen to the young master if they really were friends. The employees gaped at him, thinking he was out of his mind for not begging and shouting that he should be trying to save himself. The father stared ahead, stunned that even now the boy's thoughts were on Ryan, while the blue-haired lady watched him with wide, worried eyes. The father looked down at him with cold anger, calling him a foolish commoner, and snapping that nothing would ever happen to a noble's son just for spending time with someone like him. The boy let out a slow breath, his lips curling into a faint, stubborn smile as he made up his mind. Standing straight in the middle of the hall, the contract butler smiled and calmly admitted that he and Ryan were indeed friends. When he added that their bond had grown for over a year and would keep going, the employees stiffened in a line, stammering in disbelief at how far he was willing to go. The father's eyes burned, and he snapped that the world was far harsher than the boy seemed to think, spitting out that the Ogent name clearly meant nothing to him. Someone shouted for the head butler, trying to pull him into this mess before it went any further. The head of the house ordered the guards to deal with the boy at once and to bury every trace of what happened. Ryan's mother rushed forward, begging him to listen, but the servants only repeated that his command could not be taken back. One of the servants whispered that this felt like too much, and that it made no sense for all of them to risk their lives over a single boy. The younger servant fell silent, and the older steward told him that the family was their whole life. To guard that, he said, they had to erase even the smallest hint of trouble. The contract butler was marched down the long hall between two guards, while the head of the house insisted that, in time, everyone would be grateful for this harsh decision. Blue-haired youth burst through the doors, sprinting down the blue carpet with a blade in his hand, rage written all over his face. His mother turned with a startled smile as someone cried out Ryan's name, and the blonde boy blinked, finally snapping out of his daze between the guards. The blue-haired youth let out a furious roar, demanding to know who thought they could decide his friend's death without even asking him. The head of the house glared back, making it clear that he was the one who decided who lived under his roof. Ryan spread his arms wide and shouted that his friend had done nothing, that he was being punished just for becoming close to him. His father answered from the steps, saying that in a noble house, people did not always die because they were guilty, but because the family's hidden affairs demanded it. Ryan's voice cracked as he yelled that any gain from being a noble meant nothing if he had to toss his friend aside to keep it. The father stared him down, calling him childish and saying that for nobles, a friend was only real if there was something to share and trade between them, even if that meant the other boy had to die. As the blonde boy stood between the guards, the head of the house coldly asked if a commoner like him would ever truly see Ryan as a friend. warning that people like that only clung to noble weaknesses to get ahead. Ryan snapped back that Cheyenne would never scheme like that, clinging to the one thing he refused to doubt, his friend's heart. The head of the house only narrowed his eyes and asked how Ryan could trust that boy at all, ordering him to prove that what they had was truly friendship. Ryan faltered at the word, staring ahead as his mother watched him in worry, and he suddenly felt like he had been dragged into a game he never agreed to play. The head of the house watched him with a calm, cruel smile, already sure that Ryan would fail. Ryan's throat tightened as he understood that the moment he said he could not prove their bond, everything would be decided. His thoughts stumbled over a single word, feelings. Ryan stared down, stuck on the question of how anyone could prove what was in a person's heart. He knew a lazy answer would not save Cheyenne and that his father would tear it apart. In his mind he pictured Cheyenne in his place, sure that his friend would throw out some bold answer without fear. The idea stuck, and Ryan's eyes sharpened as he wondered what would happen if he truly tried to think like Cheyenne. Ryan's gaze burned as he dug through his memories. He remembered Cheyenne standing across from him during their spar, eyes so focused it felt like they pulled everything toward them. Another memory rose up, of his father across a card table, telling him that when he stopped clinging to tiny details, things sometimes turned out better. He remembered sitting there back then, head in his hand, unable to figure out why he kept losing. His father had told him that it was not about staring at one twitch or one card, but about watching the other person as a whole. If he did that, his father said, he could catch a glimpse of what they truly meant to do. Snapping back to the hall, Ryan fixed his eyes on the man before him, ready to judge him the same way he once tried to read an opponent across the table. In his mind he lined up everything about the man he faced. A second-class royal, the head of the Ogent family, a black-haired knight who even held a government post. This was the person whose feelings and judgment he now had to read all at once. His father's hand tightened around the sword, and Ryan understood this was no longer a simple argument. Ryan stepped forward, almost shaking, as he begged his master to let him go, warning that his friend at the library might not make it if he stayed here. Hearing Cheyenne brushed off as just a commoner, Ryan stared in disbelief, then shouted back that his master was the one who taught him that anyone who could truly connect through the sword was worthy to be called a friend. The master bent close and calmly told Ryan that true nobility meant cutting away anything that could stain the family name, no matter who got hurt. Ryan bit down hard as his father said a commoner's life was worth almost nothing and that, with such weak resolve, Ryan had only dragged that child into danger. His fist shook, but Ryan raised his head and said that he was the one who first asked Cheyenne to be his friend, so he could not just stand by and act like a coward now. Watching that stubborn fire in Ryan's eyes, the father admitted to himself that, while such simple honesty would not make him a master with the sword, it was the kind of thing that made people want to believe in him. The master finally held the sword out and said Ryan could go to the family mansion if he took it, but that he should not move at all if his resolve was weak. Ryan wrapped his hands around the hilt, choosing to carry that weight himself. Ryan's eyes burned as he clutched the sword, calling his father his master and promising to remember this favor for the rest of his life. The father narrowed his eyes and told him to remember that throwing away a friend was the same as throwing away himself, warning that this moment was not a game but a true test. Ryan burst into loud laughter, saying this was exactly the kind of moment where he would stake his life, and he joked that his father's act was so sharp he almost believed it himself. Ryan leaned forward and roared that he trusted the bond he shared with Cheyenne, and fully believed he was truly Cheyenne's friend. Ryan shouted that just being here was proof enough of his bond with Cheyenne, and that this was no simple clash between father and son. His father's face twisted, teeth grinding as he struggled to hold back his anger. As the father coldly stated that he would even cast out his own son if the family's honor was at risk, the gathered nobles and servants stared in shock, and Ryan's mother clutched her chest, barely able to believe what she was hearing. Ryan pressed a hand to his chest, bowed his head, and said that if leaving was the price to keep his friend safe, he would walk away without complaint. The father shot to his feet, rage boiling over, and barked for the men to draw their swords, demanding that if Ryan truly saw that child as his friend, he should be ready to risk his life here and now. Ryan's fingers tightened, and the sword slid free with a sharp gleam, showing everyone he was ready to stake everything on this choice. The father stared in disbelief, asking if his own son would really stand against him. Ryan met that gaze over the edge of his blade and said the steel was not meant for his father at all, only to prove how firm his belief was. The father exploded, saying Ryan could not even get along with nobles his own age, so how could some commoner be a real friend? And he hammered in that his son would never stand on the same level as them. The father claimed Ryan only kept that commoner close to soothe his own pride, but Ryan's gaze hardened as he told him flatly that this time, the great lord of the house was the one in the wrong. Ryan stepped out in front of everyone, shouting that Cheyenne stood above him in every way and that all he wanted was to push his friend toward even higher places. The father jabbed a finger at his son and called him deluded, saying it was foolish to believe a noble could ever share real friendship with someone born as a commoner. Ryan fired back that he had never forced Cheyenne into anything, then told his shaken friend to stay out of it while he swore he would settle this himself. Ryan froze mid-sentence as Cheyenne called his name from behind, that single word breaking through the heat of the fight and reminding him he was not standing here alone. Cheyenne moves to Ryan's side and tells him he does not have to carry all of this alone, saying he will answer for his own choices. Ryan remembers the moment that hand reached out to him, knowing even then that being friends might one day force him to choose between his own life and the friend holding on to him. Looking straight at Cheyenne, Ryan admits he might not survive what comes next, but says he would never regret becoming his friend. Chayern's eyes fill, the weight of Ryan's resolve crashing into him all at once. Chayern bursts out, saying Ryan stole the words from his heart, and that even if he is thrown out of this family, nothing will change the fact that they are friends. A noblewoman watches them with a faint smile, thinking that no matter how perfect the logic sounds, people are still driven by feelings, and a friend who refuses to turn away is worth more than any rule. The butlers and servants wipe at their eyes, each of them thinking how anyone would treasure a friend like that and secretly wishing they had someone the same. The stern man with glasses clicks his tongue and looks away, but the sweat on his brow gives him away. Their stubborn loyalty is starting to crack the wall he built around his own heart. The blue-haired woman clutched her chest and laughed, calling up to her grandfather as if this whole mess was the best play she had ever watched. The blue-haired boy and the others stared upward, stunned that the family elder found their risky stand so entertaining instead of furious.